Good morning, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. We're going to continue our examination of Sinaiticus, and so this is Sinaiticus part 4. And so what we've done in the previous 3 videos is we've just gotten a bit of a cursory look at what Sinaiticus is, some of the issues involved. Pretty much we've just gone through the Wikipedia article, and so we're just making ourselves familiar with some of the terminology. Now, I'm going to finish this Wikipedia article. We're going to look at a few connecting things, and then I'm going to jump into a debate that happened. I think this was in 2013. So this is between Chris Pinto and James White. And so I'm going to jump into that video, and we're going to go through. Now, it doesn't have any visual. I do remember the original one having visual. But apparently that was taken off the internet, and so it's been uploaded again, and so we're going to go through that. So I think we just need to start. So let's just jump into Sinaiticus here. Now, I don't need that open. So we got up to, last time we were just looking at Simonides. Now, I think I'd gone for quite a long time. So I thought, just skipping through some of this stuff, I thought I might just read from Simonides again. I know this doesn't make for a good follow through if you're going through a playlist, but it's good to sometimes hear things over again, because sometimes you can miss things, because he is one of the main characters. And so just as much as we would spend time on Constantine von Tischendorf, we need to understand who Simonides is. Now, take into your thought process as we're going through this that there have been a lot of claims that Simonides has been demonized, that he died of leprosy, he was cursed of God, that he was like a compulsive liar. There's a lot of things about Simonides that people find strange, weird, because usually Simonides is associated with forgery. So we're going to look at all those claims eventually, and we're going to develop a characterization of who Simonides really was. And he's a very interesting character. But we also want to look at Constantine von Tischendorf, because we know that he's a liar as well. We know that he basically stole manuscripts and things like that. And so I think just from the knowledge that I have at the moment, both of these people are of questionable character. They're basically just, to me, it just looks like two people who are just sinners who got involved with this whole thing. But one is vehemently claiming that he wrote Sinaiticus. Okay. So I'll go through this Simonides section. Then we're going to go through the recent history section, which I haven't read yet. And we'll go through the present location, impact on biblical scholarship. And I think by then we should be ready to jump into the video. Now, that depends also on any rabbit trailing, because sometimes you find a little bit of information. You want to know where a place is. You want to know why someone was there. You want to know who a new character is who's come on the scene. And so we don't want to sort of leave any stone unturned. We want to be able to spend the time going through. I don't care if we have to make 200 videos on this. We're just going to go through and constantly go through this stuff until these things become very, very familiar to us. Okay, Simonides. On September the 13th, 1862, Constantine Simonides, who was born in 1820 and he died in 1890, skilled in calligraphy and with a controversial background with manuscripts, made the claim in print in the Manchester Guardian that he had written the Codex himself as a 19-year-old boy in 1839 in the Telemonos monastery at Athos. So Mount Athos is a place where there are a lot of Byzantine texts there. Let's say, look at this monastery here. Quite an amazing looking place. Okay, so you can see the onion-shaped domes, quite interesting, very much Greek Orthodox. And so this is Mount Athos. You can see, I'm pretty sure that guy there is like an Orthodox priest of some sort in his robes. And so that is just one of the monasteries at Mount Athos. I might just click on Mount Athos there. Okay, Mount Athos is the highest point. And I guess because it has been very close to Constantinople, this has been a place where people could sort of flee to the mountains sort of thing and go to Mount Athos. Very interesting looking place. And it's very important biblically, actually, because there are a lot of manuscripts that are housed in Mount Athos, a lot of Byzantine manuscripts. And so anyway, so that's Mount Athos. So Constantine von Tischendorf, who worked with numerous Bible manuscripts, was known as somewhat flamboyant and had ambitiously sought money from several royal families for his ventures, who had indeed funded his trips. Simonides had a somewhat obscure history, as he claimed he was at Mount Athos in the years preceding Tischendorf's contact, making the claim at least plausible. And so they're saying here, okay, well, he was at Mount Athos, we know that, and so it's not like his story is just from Mars. He was on Mount Athos, and usually if you're at Mount Athos, you're not going to be nightclubbing there. You're going to be doing manuscript work or something like that, or something to do with orthodoxy. Simonides also claimed his father had died, and the invitation to Mount Athos came from his uncle, a monk there, but subsequent letters to his father were found among his possessions at his death. Okay, so Simonides is saying, okay, his father had died, his uncle, said, come to Mount Athos, but then apparently there are letters after he went to Mount Athos from his father. So that could just be a chronological misunderstanding, because some people do say they mightn't say things in a chronological order. So, but it doesn't have any footnote there or anything. This is just written there. So we'll have to investigate that a little bit later. Simonides claimed the false nature of the document in the Manchester Guardian in an exchange of letters among scholars there at the time. Now, I actually subscribed to the Guardian, and I had interest in I had access to all of their papers, but it was really hard to go through and search for things. I did find a few Simonides articles, but there wasn't much there, and I found the search engine wasn't really adequate. So I was constantly reading through piles and piles and piles of material and sort of getting dead ends, and so I just gave up the subscription. But apparently that's the way to go. If you really want to know all the stuff, you can go to the Guardian, you can subscribe to them. But I did that a few years ago. Perhaps they've updated their search engine. Henry Bradshaw, a British librarian known to both men, defended the Tischendorf find of Codex Sinaiticus, casting aside the accusations of Simonides, which later have been disproved. Okay, so that is speculation. Okay, they've been disproved by who? Like, who exactly disproved these claims? And we're going to look at those claims. We're going to examine them. We're going to make sure that we get to the bottom of this. Since Bradshaw was a social hub among many diverse scholars of the day, his aiding of Tischendorf was given much weight. Simonides died shortly after, and the issue lay dormant for many years. Now, they actually say that Simonides died of leprosy, which is apparently not true. So there's a lot about Simonides that gets said, which we really need to get to the bottom of a lot of these things. So in answers to Simonides, in Allgemeine Zeitung in December 1862, Tischendorf noted only in the New Testament were there many differences between it and all other manuscripts. Henry Bradshaw, a bibliographer, combated the claims of Constantine Simonides in a letter to the Manchester Guardian, 26th of January, 1863. Bradshaw argued that Codex Sinaiticus, brought by Tischendorf from the Greek monastery at Mount Sinai, was not a modern forgery written by Simonides. So they've got the footnote here in that place, in that book, Scholarship and Commerce, History of Cambridge University Press. The controversy seems to regard the misplaced use of fraud or forgery, since it may have been a repaired text. A copy of the Septuagint based upon Origen's hexapla. So a hexapla is a 6 column work, and so Origen, what he did is his 5th column was what we would consider today the LXX, the Septuagint. So that became like the standard. So when it's talking about a copy of the Septuagint based upon Origen's hexapla, that is sort of like the usual type of LXX or Septuagint. So basically that's just a Greek Old Testament. But Origen had a lot of Greek work in the hexapla because he was translating from other languages into Greek in that work. So a text which had been rejected for centuries because of its lineage from Eusebius, who introduced Arian doctrine into the courts of Constantine I and II. So Eusebius was an interesting writer. He wrote a lot about church history. A lot of church history is only known through Eusebius. And so not every scholar and church minister was delighted about the Codex Fine. Burgon, so we know of Dean John William Burgon, a supporter of the Textus Receptus. So that's not exactly accurate. Dean John William Burgon was a supporter of what he labeled the traditional text. His traditional text was actually the puppy feet of the majority text. So when you look at, say, Pierpont, Robinson, Hodges, Farstead, these guys, usually they are schooled in Burgon material. They might have gone to a TR position, but then they're like, no, we're going to back off from there and go to a majority text position, a Byzantine priority text, or James Snap Jr., equitable eclecticism position. And most of the time, these people will revere Dean John William Burgon. So Burgon, he had enough bullets to come against Westcott and Hort, just like James Snap Jr. He could debate James White, you know what I mean, and absolutely floor him. But it doesn't mean that he has the correct text. And so Burgon, he looked like he was defending the Textus Receptus. He looked like he was defending the King James, but he was only really defending those in a sense where they were similar to the text that he labeled the traditional text, which is basically the majority text. And so he examined a lot of manuscripts, and he was saying that the Textus Receptus needed updating and all this sort of stuff. And so sometimes people don't realize that, like, say, even the Dean Burgon Society is named after Dean John William Burgon. So D.A. Waite decided to call it that. He was going to call it that. He was going to be part of the Trinitarian Bible Society in America, actually. But they have a certain type of reformed religion a reformed, we see Jeff Riddle is able to walk in and out of those doors. And so the type of reformed Christianity that Jeff Riddle had. So D.A. Waite's a independent fundamentalist Baptist. And so after a while, they were at loggerheads. So he decided to call it the Dean Burgon Society, which is sort of unfortunate because it would have been better just to call it the Textus Receptus Society or something like that. Because then so many people just pointed out in Burgon's work that he clearly says, I'm not defending the Textus Receptus. And so it was sort of like, it's just unfortunate. But a lot of people don't realize that Burgon, in some places, actually came against TR readings. So, and when I say the TR, well, I'm basically saying the King James is the final edition of the Textus Receptus. But it's in English. Now, had they done a parallel text, there would be no King James only, Textus Receptus only movements. That would just be one and the same, because you just go, oh, that Greek word means this English word, and you wouldn't have a problem. But they didn't do a parallel text, and Scrivener attempted to do that 250 years later. But basically, we go with the Textus Receptus. The vast majority of it was compiled by Theodore Beza, who was one of the final editors of the TR editions. And then the King James translators, they only amended it in a few tiny little places, but basically creating their own Greek text. And that's why Scrivener had to make a Greek text looking at those issues. But the vast majority of it is Theodore Beza. So anyway, I thought I'd just clear that up. So not every scholar and minister was delighted about the Codex Fine. Burgon, a supporter of the Textus Receptus, sort of half true, suggested the Codex Sinaiticus, as well as Codex Vaticanus and Codex Beza, were the most corrupt documents extant. So what are we looking at here? Codex Sinaiticus is the one that we're talking about. Codex Vaticanus is the one that appeared in the Vatican Library around 1480, somewhere around that time, give or take a few years. And it was examined by Erasmus. So Erasmus's friend Paulos Bombasius, he actually lived with him in Venice. And so he went and lived with him, I think it was for a year. And then he went and lived with Aulus Manutius, who was the greatest publisher of Greek works ever. And he was working in his print shop as a proofreader, which is quite interesting, proofreading the Greek texts. And at the same time, Erasmus was part of the Byzantine school. So there were apparently about 5,000 Greeks living in Venice at the time due to the fall of Constantinople. This is about 70 years later. And so there were a lot of Greeks hanging around. There was a lot of studies being done on this. And so, but yeah, Codex Vaticanus was checked by Erasmus. And Erasmus rejected Codex Vaticanus. He believed it was a back translation from a Latin document, and that was also what John Mill concluded in his 1707. So if you want to know more about that, if you go to the Erasmus editions, the 1535 edition of Erasmus, he talks about Codex Vaticanus basically being a back translation from a Latin document. He believed it was amended at the Council of Florence, which was in 1439. So it's quite interesting. So then we have Codex Beza. Now, Codex Beza is an interesting text. It's a diglot, which has the Gospels and the Book of Acts. And this document is almost like a paraphrase. There's a lot of changes in the text. And Theodore Beza had his hands on this manuscript, and so that's why it's named Codex Beza. But and I usually say Beza for some reason and call Theodore Beza, just to make that distinction, because it's got this like extra E on it. I don't know if I'm correctly saying those terms, but I usually call it Codex Beza, so people don't get confused with, because I'm often talking about Beza. And but he looked at this, he examined it, and he basically gave it to, I think it was the Cambridge University, and said, look, with a note basically saying that Codex Beza. I might actually go there and just quickly explain this because it is of interest. History. Okay, so Theodore Beza, a friend and successor of Calvin, who gave it in 1581 to the University of Cambridge in the comparative security of England, which accounts for its double name. It remains in the university library, etc. Okay, so they don't have, or maybe it's in the footnotes. Okay, here we go. Beza wrote in the letter accompanying his gift that the manuscript was obtained from the monastery of St. Irenaeus of Lyons during the War of 1562. Lyons was sacked by the Huguenots in that year, and this manuscript was probably part of the loot. The reformers said it had lain in the monastery for long ages, neglected and covered with dust, but his statement is rejected by most modern scholars. Yeah, Theodore Beza is just a liar. It's quite amazing these guys firsthand held the thing in their hand and looked at it, but modern scholars are just like, no, that's just not true. It is claimed, in fact, that this codex is the one which was used at the Council of Trent in 1546 by William Dupré. English writers persist in calling this Frenchman a praetor. Bishop of Claremont, and so he's going through this information. Okay, but it doesn't really go into what Beza said because he actually had a note there. So I was hoping that it would have the note, but it doesn't. So anyway, but that is another manuscript. See, what's amazing is scholars go Codex Sinaiticus, yes, oldest and best. Codex Vaticanus, oldest and best. Codex Beza, rubbish, throw it under the bus. Why? I mean, Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus, they differ hugely between themselves. Now, this one is like a, you know, it's like a three-armed monster. You know, it's strange, but it's like it's just rejected. See, the thing is with Textus Receptus people, King James people, we reject all three of these as corrupt. They're just at different varying levels of corruption. So Codex Sinaiticus being one of the worst, Vaticanus being terrible, as Erasmus and John Mill clearly pointed out, and Codex Beza, everyone is in agreement this is terrible. So, but Burgon said that these three manuscripts were the most corrupt documents extant. So he was in agreement, saying these are just terrible. Why on earth is anyone using these for translation work? Each of these codices clearly exhibits a fabricated text, is the result of arbitrary and reckless recension. So that's Dean Burgon. The two most weighty of these codices, and so this is the Hebrew Aleph and B, so oftentimes you'll say Aleph and B, Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, he likens to the two false witnesses of Matthew 26:60. So that's in the Revision Revised. However, independent discoveries of other fragments of the Codex in recent history, see below, prove its authenticity and disprove all theories of it being a forgery. Isn't that interesting? Just let me read that again. You know, it's almost like you're looking at, you know, Building 7. Just lying in rubble, and it's like everyone's looking at each other going, how did that happen? And it's like, however, independent discoveries of other fragments of the Codex in recent history, see below, prove its authenticity and disprove all theories of it being a forgery. You know, there's just not a chance that this is a fake or a forgery. Just completely disproven. Let's move on. Let's continue with this story. And so we're going to examine those claims, and I'm open to be persuaded either way according to the facts. So we've got Bible version conspiracy has a little hand there. I think it's a wave. And then we've got Shelley Craft saying hello. And so welcome out to the Sinaiticus series. Recent history. In the 20th century, Vladimir Benishevich, 1874 to 1938, discovered parts of 3 more leaves of the Codex in the bindings of other manuscripts in the library of Mount Sinai. Benishevich went on 3 occasions to the monastery, 1907, 1908, and 1911, but does not tell when or from which book these were discovered. These leaves were also acquired for St. Petersburg, where they remain. Okay, so some are most of it's in the British Library, but some of it's in St. Petersburg. So very interesting. So, and that's what we also want to piece together. We've got Techmeister in the house saying good evening. What we want to piece together is exactly where everything is and when they were founded. So for many decades, the Codex was preserved in the Russian National Library. In 1933, the Soviet Union sold the Codex to the British Museum after 1973 British Library for £100,000 raised by public subscription worth £7.6 million in 2023. After coming to Britain, it was examined by Skeet and Milne using an ultraviolet lamp. So this is the type of technology that we can use in the last 50 years. I'm pretty sure this type of technology has been used. So they're saying that was in 2004. I'm pretty sure I know Milne. I know that name, but I'm pretty sure that's a very old name. So I'm not sure when exactly they were using this ultraviolet technology. I assumed that it was only 50 years old, but perhaps it's a lot older. But that's interesting. They're using this type of technology. So in May 1975, during restoration work, the monks at St. Catherine's Monastery discovered a room beneath the St. George Chapel, which contained many parchment fragments. Kurt Aland and his team from the Institute for New Testament Textual Research were the first scholars who were invited to analyze, examine, and photograph these new fragments of the New Testament in 1982. Among these fragments were 12 complete leaves from the Sinaiticus, even leaves from the Pentateuch, and 1 leaf from the Shepherd of Hermes. Together with these leaves, 67 Greek manuscripts of the New Testament have been found, uncials 0276 to 0296, and some minuscules. In June 2005, a team of experts from the United Kingdom, Europe, Egypt, Russia, and the United States undertook a joint venture to produce a new digital edition of the manuscript involving 4 holding libraries, and a series of other studies was announced. And so the world's oldest Bible, this is the footnotes, world's oldest Bible goes global. And then we've got British Library heads project in digitalizing the world's oldest Bible. So notice they're saying the world's oldest Bible. So that's what they're claiming for Sinaiticus, that this is the world's oldest Bible. And then we've got Codex Sinaiticus and a bunch of German words. This will include the hyperspectral imaging to photograph the manuscripts to look for hidden information such as erased or faded text. This is to be done in cooperation with the British Library. Okay. More than 1/4 of the manuscript was made publicly available at the Sinaiticus website. And so I'll just jump there so you can know what we're talking about, because this gets brought up quite a bit. Okay, so we're going to archive. So I'm not sure why it goes to archive. I guess because sometimes these sites can just drop out. Sometimes people can, a domain can lapse. It's, a credit card can run out of date and the domain lapses. And so, these sites fail. But so, yeah, it was put here. We've got the British Library, the National Library of Russia, St. Catherine's Monastery, and the Leipzig University Library. So these are where Sinaiticus is housed. And so this comes into play when people look at the different colorings of Sinaiticus, and so which we'll go into. I'll show you a little bit of that. I'll just go to Sinaiticus.net. So this is one of the big claims by David Daniels, saying that these were colored, with coffee, tea leaves, etc. So some of the manuscript pages look very, very old. Some of them look very new. So we see this is like an image that was used as the front page of David Daniels' book. Now, you mightn't be able to see that clearly there, but maybe I can zoom in. It was said that, these are white as snow, and look, these other ones are dirty. These dirty ones were the ones that were taken by Tischendorf. These other ones were at St. Petersburg. I'm only just making that up, but that's sort of like the claim. These were in other libraries. Why aren't they stained as well? But then someone like Elijah Hixson's come along and said, well, it's actually the photography that they're using. That some people are using different hues and things like that. So you can see on the edge of each photo. So I was trying to zoom in there. You can see these color spectrums, and so we'll be investigating all that, because this is one of the big claims. It's like you can just clearly see that these have been tampered with and these haven't. And so yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's something. As soon as it came out and they were pointing that out, I was like, yep, it's fake. That's convincing. But someone like Bryan Ross, he's like, well, I was convinced, but now I'm no longer convinced, and all this sort of stuff. So we will be looking at that. So that will cause us to have a bit of a crash course in photography and the methodology that they use in taking these photos, because people who work for the CSNTM, this would be bog standard stuff, for them to understand these things. And Elijah Hixson, he is currently working for them, and so that's something that we will have to examine, look into, and think about. So yes, so that's another page that we're going to go through eventually, but I don't want to go through there yet. We're just still getting acquainted with all the issues. And so these are the 4 libraries where we have parts of Sinaiticus. The British Library, they bought a lot from the Russians in 1933. Stalin needed a bit of money, so he sold it. So the National Library of Russia, I'm pretty sure that's in St. Petersburg. They have the parts that came from Uspensky and St. Catherine's Monastery. They've found a few bits here and there over the years. So they've got bits, and then Leipzig University. So that would be, I'm pretty sure, where the first original Codex Sinaiticus, I think they were calling it Fredericus, something like that, after Prince Frederick. I might just quickly look at that. It was called, because I want to get familiar with these names, and so no, it doesn't have that name. Yeah, it was called something else. But anyway, we don't want to rabbit trail down there, so let's. Okay, so more than 1/4 of the manuscript was made publicly available at the Codex Sinaiticus website on the 24th of July, 2008. On the 6th of July, 2009, 800 more pages of the manuscript were made available, showing over half the entire text. So BBC News, historical Bible pages put online. And it's interesting, I was with a Jehovah's Witness the other day, and the White Album of the Beatles was playing. And I actually said to him, did you realize that in the British Library, Codex Sinaiticus is sitting opposite the White Album of the Beatles. And he was like, oh, wow, how do you know that information? You know, and so this is a Jehovah's Witness guy, I know. But that came through, Dan Wallace pointed that out one time. So by 2009, we got half of Sinaiticus available online, although the entire text was intended to be shown by that date. The complete document is now available online in digital form and available for scholarly study. The online version has a fully transcribed set of digital pages, including amendments to the text and 2 images of each page, with both standard lighting and raked lighting to highlight the texture of the parchment. Prior to the 1st of September 2009, the University of the Arts London PhD student Nicholas Saras discovered the previously unseen fragment of the Codex in the library of St. Catherine's Monastery. It contains the text of the book of Joshua 1:10. Okay, so the headline for that was Fragment from World's Oldest Bible Found Hidden in Egyptian Monastery. Okay, so the present location, the Codex is now split into 4 unequal portions. I should read these things properly. 347 leaves in the British Library in London, 199 of the Old Testament and 148 of the New Testament, 12 leaves and 14 fragments in the St. Catherine's Monastery. So there's not that much in St. Catherine's. 43 leaves in the Leipzig University Library. So I'm pretty sure they were the original ones that Tischendorf grabbed. And the fragments of 3 leaves in the National Library in St. Petersburg. So that must be Uspensky's. I'm sure we'll find out through this. St. Catherine's Monastery still maintains the importance of a letter handwritten in 1844 with an original signature of Tischendorf confirming that he borrowed those leaves and that they would be returned from Russia if requested. However, Russian scholars contend that recently published documents included a deed of a gift dated September the 11th, 1868. For years after the removal of the manuscript from the monastery and signed by Archbishop Kallistratos and the monks of the monastery, amount to a proof that the manuscript was obtained legally. This deed, which agrees with a report by Kurt Aland on the matter. So Kurt Aland is one of the architects behind the Nestle Aland text, has now been published. This development is not widely known in the English-speaking world, as only German and Russian language media reported on it in 2009. Doubts as to the legality of the gift arose because when Tischendorf originally removed the manuscript from St. Catherine's Monastery in September 1859, the monastery was without an archbishop, so that even though the intention to present the manuscript to the Tsar had been expressed, no legal gift could be made at the time. Resolution of the matter was delayed through the turbulent reign of Archbishop Cyril, consecrated 7th of December 1859, disposed 24th of August 1866. Skeat, in his article, The Last Chapter in the History of Codex Sinaiticus, concluded it this way. This is not the place to pass judgments, but perhaps I may say that, as it seems to me, both the monks and Tischendorf deserve our deepest gratitude. Tischendorf for having alerted the monks to the importance of the manuscript, and the monks for having undertaken the daunting task of searching through the vast mass of material with such spectacular results, and then doing everything in their power to safeguard the manuscript against further loss. If we accept the statement of Uspensky that he saw the Codex in 1845, the monks must have worked very hard to complete their search and bind up the results in so short a period. Okay, so that is Skeat in 2000, The Last Chapter in the History of Codex Sinaiticus. But if you believe that this manuscript is not a genuine manuscript, then this is just something that probably didn't really happen. But anyway, let's move on. Impact on biblical scholarship. Along with Codex Vaticanus, Codex Sinaiticus is considered one of the most valuable manuscripts available, as it is one of the oldest and likely closer to the original text of the Greek New Testament. So notice it's old, so it must be close to the original. But the amazing thing is you've got two of these. I mean, when you got one of them, it's like, oh, well, maybe it's that one. But when you got two and they differ, and it's like they're pretty much of the same age, apparently, why are there two that have these massive differences in it? Doesn't that, which one is the oldest and the best? Which one is the closest to the readings? And the thing is, like Dean John William Burgon said, it's easier to find where there's a mistake in it, where they disagree, than where they agree. So these are corrupted texts, and they're like, well, oldest and best, and then we've got another oldest and best. I wonder how many other oldest and best we're going to come up with, and that's why people like Bart Ehrman just laugh at this and just say there are like multiple Bible texts, there are multiple Christianities, and all this sort of stuff. And so this is just contradictory to everything that we, as people who believe in the preservation of the Word of God, we just look at that and just think it's just ridiculous. So it's the only uncial manuscript with the complete text of the New Testament, and the only ancient manuscript of the New Testament written in 4 columns per page, which has survived to the present day. With only 300 years separating Codex Sinaiticus and the lifetime of Jesus, it is considered by some to be more accurate than most New Testament copies in preserving readings, which were almost all manuscripts are assumed by them to be in error. So that's Frederick Kenyon, 1939, Our Bible and the Ancient Manuscripts. For the Gospels, Sinaiticus is considered among some people as the second most reliable witness of the text after Vaticanus. In the Acts of the Apostles, its text is equal to that of Vaticanus. In the epistles, Sinaiticus is assumed to be the most reliable witness of the text. In the book of Revelation, however, its text is corrupted and is considered of poor quality and inferior to the text of Codex Alexandrinus, P47, and even some minuscule manuscripts in this place, for example, minuscule 2053 and 2062. Okay, so that is the end of the article. So it says, see also biblical manuscript, Codex Sinaiticus Rescriptus. So we might just quickly look at that because we don't want to get confused. Sometimes, like we might see Codex Vaticanus, but there are a lot of manuscripts actually called Codex Vaticanus. I think it's Codex Vaticanus 1209 or something like that. That's what Codex Vaticanus is numbered at. But then you can have Codex Vaticanus and another number, but it's nothing to do with the Codex Vaticanus we're talking about. So the way that they've actually numbered a lot of these manuscripts, it must have been pretty hard because 200 years ago they've sort of collected a few in a few different libraries and they've started different numbering systems. So eventually people have come on board and started to number these things, but sometimes they were numbering them according to a certain type of importance. But then sometimes they were numbering, you'll have one manuscript in one library and half of the other part of the manuscript is in another library, and they've both got different numbers. And so it's caused a lot of problems. And but it takes a while to get your head around all this stuff. So we just want to look at this one called Codex Sinaiticus Rescriptus. So mostly originating in St. Catherine's Monastery, Sinai, it is an accumulation of 16 or 18 Christian, Palestinian, Aramaic, palimpsest manuscripts containing the Old Testament Gospels, epistles, pericopes of diverse lectionaries, various unidentified homilies, and one of John Chrysostom, haliographic texts as the life of Pachomius and the martyrdom of Philemon Martyrs, and the Catechism of Cyril of Jerusalem. So you can see this is like nothing to do really with Codex Sinaiticus. Okay. The manuscripts are recycled parchment material that were erased and were reused by the 10th century Georgian scribe Ione Zosime for overwriting them with homilies of Ladgardi in 979 to 980 AD. Part of the parchment leaves Sinai, I'll leave that, has been brought by him from the monastery of Saint Sabas of south of Jerusalem, where he moved to St. Catherine's Monastery and became became their librarian. In the 19th century, most of the codex was removed from the monastery at two periods. Tischendorf took 2/3 in 1855 and 1857 with the Codex Sinaiticus to St. Petersburg and handed it over to the Imperial Library, now the National Library of Russia, and the remaining third left on a clandestine route and found its way into various European and later also into US collections, at present in a Norwegian collection. From the new finds of 1975 in the Monastery of St. Catherine, missing folios of some of the underlying manuscripts could be retrieved. Okay, so these are the manuscripts, lectionary with Old Testament and epistle pericopes, pretty much the same, but with the Gospels. This one's lectionary with Gospel pericopes. So these are all different manuscripts, and this is what they have in them. Okay, so these are just sort of called Sinaiticus Rescriptus. Okay, so I'm pretty sure Rescriptus must mean like an overwrite. Rescriptus definition: an written answer of a Roman emperor, an official or authoritative order, an act of instance of rewriting. Okay, so Rescriptus. Yeah, that makes sense. So a rewritten manuscript. So these, it has Tischendorf there. It talks about the new finds, but I think these are not really anything to do with Codex Sinaiticus, the one that we're looking at. So I just sort of wanted to clear that up, because sometimes you can see all this stuff and it's like, what's that? You know, I guess we'll have to look into that a little bit later on. Yeah, here it's saying it's a 6th century biblical manuscript. But then we got Sinai Palimpsest Project, and then we've got Codex Sinaiticus. So I guess they group it in with Sinaiticus because it's found in Mount Sinai. So anyway, let's back off from that for a sec. And then we've got the 50 Bibles of Constantine. So this is an interesting concept, okay? So it's not a long article, so I might just quickly read through this, because I know a lot of people have no idea about the 50 Bibles of Constantine. But this is one of the theories that often comes up. So the 50 Bibles of Constantine were Bibles in the original Greek language commissioned in 331 by Constantine I and prepared by Eusebius of Caesarea. So I'm pretty sure this is the same Eusebius who's the church historian. I know Jeff Riddle was going through a series just reading Eusebius. So oftentimes you find Eusebius talking about different books and different characters, what happened with Judas Iscariot and other people. And sometimes there are works that are only found in Eusebius's writings, because everything else has faded away, but Eusebius's writings remain. They were made for the use of the Bishop of Constantinople. Okay, so that's the Constantinople bishop there now, in the growing number of churches in that very new city. Eusebius quoted the letter of commission in his Life of Constantine. Okay, so that's something that we could read later. And it is the only surviving source from which we know the existence of the Bible. So basically, Eusebius has written this in the life of Constantine, and this is the only place where we know that this is these Bibles were commissioned. Biblical canon. It is speculated that this commission may have provided motivation for the development of the canon lists. Okay, so you have the Eusebian canons, which maybe I should just quickly show you. You might see at the beginning of a lot of Byzantine texts, you see, I'm just sort of looking for a picture of it. Mightn't have it. I'll just quickly Google it. You spelled that wrong, but it'll come up. There it is. Eusebian canons. So you see this type of thing at the beginning of a Byzantine text oftentimes, and these are the Eusebian canons. So it's basically just like a table of contents, but oftentimes it's trying to show also a harmonization where certain things are appearing in Scripture. So yeah, it's of interest, and it is important, and so I guess we'll get into that sort of stuff later on. But that's not really. But I just wanted to show you that's what it's talking about. So it is speculated that this commission may have provided motivation for the development of canon lists, and that Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus are possible surviving examples of these Bibles. Now, it does seem strange to have two old Bibles that are contradictory. Like, wouldn't you think that if they're going to get these, 500 Bibles or 50 Bibles, made up, that they're going to be cohesive? They're going to say the same thing, not just be all over the shop. There is no evidence among the records of the First Council of Nicaea of any determination of the canon. So that was in 325. And as James White points out in a lot of history classes, it's an important date to remember. Oftentimes in my thinking, like, because I do a lot of Textus Receptus work, there are certain epochs and certain pinpoint periods of time that I relate back to. So 1516, when Erasmus did his first edition, is one. I sort of go, I think, before and after that period of time. The 1550 of Stephanus is another important one. The 1598 of Beza, and of course 1611, 1881 Westcott and Hort. So these are dates which sometimes, if I'm in like 1730s, I'm like, what am I referencing here? Where am I? And just to have a reference point, a period of time that you're familiar with, it's really good when you're studying this type of thing, because or else you can just be lost. And so just even just knowing the Council of Nicaea is 325, most people know that, but there are certain periods where we go, okay, before the Council of Nicaea, and even a lot of the books are anti-Nicaea, or they're before Nicaea or after Nicaea, and so they're put into that type of category. So it is quite an important epoch when you're studying these type of things. So there's no evidence among the records of the First Council of Nicaea of any determination of the canon. However, Jerome, in his prologue to Judith, makes the claim that the Book of Judith was found by the Nicene Council to have been counted among the number of sacred scriptures. So I'm not sure who says that. It says here in the Catholic Encyclopedia, Robert Appleton Company, the Synod of Nicaea is said to have accounted it as sacred scripture. It is true that no such declaration is to be found in the canons of Nicaea, and it is uncertain whether St. Jerome is referring to the use made in the book in the discussions of the council, or whether he was misled by some spurious canons attributed to the council. Okay, so there's speculation on that as well. But sometimes in Wikipedia, you're getting people who are sort of like really influenced by Bart Ehrman, and he'll do a program on this and say, see, it's all rubbish. And you look into it, and it's usually just the way things are read, the way things, the angle that you're coming from. Requisition. According to Eusebius, Constantine I wrote him in this letter, wrote to him in this letter. I have thought it expedient to instruct your prudence to order 50 copies of the sacred scriptures, the provision and use of which you know to be most needful for the instruction of the church, to be written on prepared parchment in a legible and in a convenient portable form by professional transcribers thoroughly practiced in their art. Well, if they did Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, these guys were pretty sloppy, because they disagree 3,000 times just in the Gospels. About accomplishing the emperor's demand. Such were the emperor's commands, which were followed by the immediate execution of the work itself, which we sent him in magnificent and elaborately bound volumes, a threefold and fourfold form. Okay. This is the usual way in which Eusebius's text is translated, but there are more possibilities, because the phrase, and it's got a big long Greek line there, has many potential meanings. 3 or 4 codices were prepared at the time, Cursop Lake and Bernard de Montfaucon. Codices were sent in 3 or 4 boxes. F.A. Heineken. Number 3, codices were prepared in 3 or 4 folios. That's F.H.A. Scrivener. Number 4, text of the codices was written in 3 or 4 columns per page. Tischendorf, Gebhardt, and Gregory and Cursop Lake. Number 5, codices were sent by 3 or 4s. Number 6, some codices contained 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but others included 4 Gospels, including John, Edward Schwartz. So that they're all the different interpretations of that. So this is the thing. Once you start getting into the the consensus of scholars, say this and say that, half the time they're saying that they can't even interpret this line of Greek text in the same way. They're all over the place with it. So that's why you've got to examine these things for yourself and not just take someone's word for it. Athanasius of Alexandria referred to another request of producing Bible manuscripts. Quote, I sent to him volumes containing the Holy Scriptures, which he had ordered me to prepare for him, end quote. Athanasius could have received his request between 337 and 339. Okay, so Codex Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. Constantine von Tischendorf, discoverer of Codex Sinaiticus, believed that Sinaiticus and Vaticanus were among these 50 Bibles prepared by Eusebius of Caesarea. According to him, they were written with 3 as Vaticanus, or 4 per page as Sinaiticus. Tischendorf's view was supported by Pere Batifol. So what he's saying there is you got Vaticanus has 3 columns, Sinaiticus has 4 columns, and so that's what's being talked about here. But as we can see, there's 6 different interpretations of that, of what's being said there. But this is what Tischendorf believed. Frederick Henry Ambrose Scrivener rejected Tischendorf's speculation because of differences between 2 manuscripts. In Sinaiticus, the text of the Gospels is divided according to the Ammonian sections with references to the Eusebian canons. So we looked at the Eusebian canons that are in the front of a lot of Byzantine texts. So we're going to look at this in a second, the Ammonian sections. But Vaticanus used the older system of division. Vaticanus was prepared in a format of 5 folios in 1 quire. And so what's it talking about there? Okay, so you got folios and quire. So these are printing. This is printing terminology. I don't want to bore you with that. But Sinaiticus had 8 folios. And so what they used to do was sort of print like a little book within a book, and then they would sew all these together. Sometimes you can see that in a modern Bible where, if a section falls out, you know that it's like a little book, and it's placed within it, and then they're all sort of stitched together or glued together. According to Scrivener, Eusebian Bibles contain 3 or 4 folios per quire. Scrivener used a Latin version of Valesius, Scrivener stated that the Eusebian is unclear and should not be used for a doubtful theory. Okay, so I just want to show you what the Ammonian sections are. So this is in the Eusebian canons. So it's known as the Ammonian sections. Okay, so I want to explain why. Copy, find. Oops, we've got this Wikipedia stuff happening. Okay, so it doesn't really explain why. So let's just forget that. Westcott and Hort argued the order of biblical books on the Eusebian list of canonical books, quoted by Eusebius in Ecclesiastical History, Volume 3, number 25, is different from every surviving manuscript. Probably none of the 50 copies survive today. Okay, so that's what Westcott and Hort believed. The order of books in the Eusebian list of canonical books quoted by Eusebius in Ecclesiastical History is different from every surviving manuscript. Caspar Rene Gregory, he was a Unitarian, I'm pretty sure, believed that, I've just got to check that, whether it was him or, yeah, his teacher was Ezra Abbott, who was a Unitarian. I'm just going to quickly type in uni. It doesn't say he's a Unitarian. I think he was just influenced by Unitarians. There is also like Caspar Rene Gregory, and then there's von Soden. Von Soden was definitely a Unitarian. He believed that Vaticanus and Sinaiticus were written in Caesarea, and they could belong to the Eusebian 50. According to Victor Gard-Thusen, Sinaiticus is younger than Vaticanus by at least 50 years. Kersop Lake states copies of 3 and 4 columns is grammatically sound, but there appears not to be good evidence for this technical use of the words. Sending them by 3s or 4s is the most attractive. But there is no evidence that prissa can denote 3 at a time, regarding in 3 or 4 columns per page. There is only one known manuscript written that way, Sinaiticus. Sinaiticus has a curious spelling of the word krabatos as krabaktos. Sinaiticus spells Israelites as Israelites. Okay. Vaticanus has Israelites. It sounds like they're talking about a place. These forms have been regarded as Latin, and they can be found in papyri from Egypt. There is no other known Greek dialect in which these forms are used. The argument for a Caesarean origin of these two manuscripts is much weaker than Egyptian. It was Kersop Lake. According to Heinrich Schumacher, Eusebius instead prepared 50 lectionaries, not Bibles. Okay. So lectionaries, yeah, they're designed to be read in churches. So you might have, they're designed around a calendar more so. Skeet argued that Sinaiticus was a first attempt to produce a full Bible in fulfillment of Constantine's orders, but was abandoned before completion in favor of a more compact form, then languishing in Caesarea until salvaged in the 6th century, while Vaticanus was one of the 50 Bibles actually delivered to Constantinople. Kurt Aland, Bruce M. Metzger, and Bart Ehrman doubt that Sinaiticus and Vaticanus were copied by Eusebius on the Constantine order. Okay, so they're saying that there's no relation to the 50 Bibles and Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. Okay, so interesting. So I just sort of talk about that because a lot of people bring up the 50 Bibles of Constantine and don't really know what they are. So, yeah, we have the Syriac Sinaiticus. So this is a Syriac document. This was quoted in the 1952 Revised Standard Version at Matthew chapter 1, verse 16, where it talks about, was it 16 or 18, where it talks about Joseph being the husband of Mary. It actually says Joseph being the father. It talks about Joseph being the father of Jesus. And they had a footnote to this Syriac Sinaiticus, which is very strange and weird to do that. Yeah, here it has Matthew 1:16. It contains Joseph, to whom was betrothed Mary, who begat Jesus, who is called Christ. So it actually comes against the virgin birth there. And they had this as a footnote in an English Bible, like not even a Greek manuscript or anything. And they got this footnote there. It's just very strange that they had that. But so this is a Syriac document. It just so happens to have the Sinaiticus name in it. So because it's in St. Catherine's Monastery, Old Syriac Gospel is late 4th or early 5th century manuscript on 173 folios containing a nearly complete translation of the 4 canonical Gospels of the New Testament into Syriac. And so very interesting, but not related to Codex Sinaiticus, okay, but related to St. Catherine's Monastery and to other things like the Diatessaron, which are manuscripts and books that we'll look into later when we look at apocryphal works and things like that. Okay, so we've gone through those two. And I think, yeah, I was going to just go through Constantine Simonides. Now, I'm just going to read through this and then I'm going to start the video. So Constantine Simonides, and so we're just sort of refreshing ourselves on who these characters are, okay? Was a paleographer and dealer of icons, known as a man of extensive learning with significant knowledge of manuscripts and miraculous calligraphy. He was one of the most versatile forgers of the 19th century. He was born on the small island of Symi, very nice place, in the southeastern Aegean Sea in 1820 or 1824. He died in Egypt of leprosy, and then it has in a bracket, the report was actually hearsay devised by his English antagonist. There's no reference given there. This is the problem with Wikipedia. They, like, if I put that in there, they would delete it straight away. But for some reason, someone can do that, and it doesn't get deleted. Simonides lived in the monasteries on Mount Athos between 1839 and 1841, and again in 1852. So he lived there for like 2 years, and then he went back there in 1852, Mount Athos, during which time he acquired some of the biblical manuscripts that he later sold. He produced a lot of manuscripts ascribed to Hellenistic and early Byzantine periods. He allegedly forged a number of documents and manuscripts and claimed that they were originals of the Gospel of Mark, as well as original manuscripts of poems of Homer. He sold some of these manuscripts to the King of Greece. Greek scholars exposed what some claimed to be forgeries quickly, and he left Greece and traveled from country to country with his manuscripts. And so what we've got to understand is a lot of this could be sensationalized. So that's why we have to get to the bottom of this, because usually there's a popular way of talking about someone like Simonides. But it's like with any type of person who is, you know, infamous. Like, say, here in Australia, we have a bushranger called Ned Kelly. Now, Ned Kelly, he would rob banks and things like that. But he's made out as a national hero as well. So there are people on both sides, people who want him to be a hero and don't believe he did anything wrong. There are people who point out that things that he did wrong and crimes and things like that. And so I think with Simonides, we read through this. I'm not sure which angle this person who has written the most of this Wikipedia article is coming from, but a lot of the time the general consensus wins, which is usually the critical text scholarship. So I'm sure that Stephen Avery's, been on this site and corrected a few little things here and there. But and so he visited England between 1853 and 1855 and other European countries, and his literary activity was extraordinary. Some of his works were published in Moscow, Odessa, and England and Germany. And he also wrote many other works that were never published. In 1843 until 1856, he offered manuscripts purporting to be of ancient origin for sale all over Europe. Frederick G. Kenyon writes that Simonides, so here's a picture of Kenyon there, writes that Simonides created a considerable sensation by producing quantities of Greek manuscripts professing to be of fabulous antiquity, such as Homer in an almost prehistoric style of writing, a lost Egyptian historian, a copy of St. Matthew's Gospel on papyrus, written 15 years after the Ascension, and many other portions of the New Testament dating to the first century. These productions were then exposed as forgeries. So he was claiming that he had 1 John 5:7 in a first century manuscript. So I do remember putting that article on my Textus Receptus Academy just out of interest. It was like, well, he's making these claims. But we're going to check and see how they were exposed as forgeries, whether they were, whether they weren't, whether he knew it, whether he made these forgeries. We're going to look at all that. So in 1854 and 1855, Simonides tried unsuccessfully to sell some manuscripts for the British Museum and the Bodleian Library. So Bodleian Library is one of the main libraries of Oxford University. And so I'm pretty sure the Bodleian Library also has a bit of a branch in the old Geneva area. No, it's just Oxford. I'm getting confused with another library. So yeah, Bodleian. So let's move from there. Okay. Where have I gone to? Yeah. Thomas Phillips was a less critical purchaser who brought for the Phillips Library at Cheltenham some manuscripts. In 1855, he visited Berlin and Leipzig. He informed William Dindorf that he owned a palimpsest of Irenaeus. After this was exposed as a forgery, the print run was destroyed by Oxford University Press after a small number of copies had been sold. Okay. On 13th of September 1862, in an article of The Guardian, he claimed that he was the real author of Codex Sinaiticus and that he wrote it in 1839. Okay. So let's just see if this leads anywhere. Newspaper archive. So you've got to start a free trial and all the rest of it. But it does have the link there from Wikipedia, so you can read that, which will be of interest. I'm sure it's already been done somewhere. According to him, it was one of poor work of his youth. According to Simonides, he visited Sinai in 1852 and saw the Codex. Henry Bradshaw, a scholar, did not believe his claims. Okay, so Henry Bradshaw was the one who stood behind Tischendorf, and he had a lot of weight behind him, and so caused a lot of people to doubt what Simonides was saying. Simonides questioned many official scientific positions accepted by scholars. He did not respect any scholars. That's an interesting claim, just thrown in there. He interpreted Egyptian hieroglyphics in different ways from Champollion and other Egyptologists. Okay, so, but I'm sure in those days, a lot of the hieroglyphs weren't deciphered, so perhaps we've got to look at the historical context of that statement. He tried to prove that his method of interpreting Egyptian hieroglyphics was superior. Okay. He placed the death of Irenaeus at 292 instead of between 130 and 200. Also, in many other complicated questions, he had his own usually controversial point of view. But after ascribing the authorship of Sinaiticus to himself, the rest of his credibility was destroyed by the British press. So it's like, he not only claimed that Codex Sinaiticus was written by himself, but he had all this other baggage as well, and everyone knew he was a fake and a forger. But then when he said Codex Sinaiticus was his work, it's like everyone rolled their eyes and sort of went, "What an idiot!" And so that's the general view that you get from that. But is that true? So it could be. We've got to examine these things. We've got to be real. We don't want to just side with some of these because it works in our favor. We want to make sure that what's being said here is factual, because it's that could just it's by the British press. So is it just trial by media? Were the British press just deceived by the claims of Tischendorf? The Artemidorus manuscript. In 2006, a papyrus roll was exhibited at Turin, which appeared to be part of Book 2 of the Lost Geographical Descriptions of Artemidorus, Ephesus. It was exhibited again in Berlin in 2008. It has been argued by Luciano Canfora that the manuscript is the work of Constantine Simonides. Richard Janko also believes that the roll is a forgery. So they're saying that this one here, we'll just quickly go there, is by Simonides and is a forgery. So that's an interesting claim. And so they've claimed that it was perhaps by Constantine Simonides. So, I mean, you've got scholars saying that this guy is a forger, creating papyrus like this, which is quite interesting. Okay, so some authentic manuscripts which were brought from Constantine Simonides include minuscule 110, 502, 503, 644, and 2793. External links, some interesting things. Okay, so I think we've finished the Sinaiticus article on Wikipedia. We've gone through a few other little articles on Tischendorf and Simonides. So I think what we really need to do now is go to this debate between James White and Chris Pinto. So this appears on the Bible version conspiracy page. So this is run by Joseph Armstrong. So I'll just read this here. It says, two of the biggest names in the Bible version controversy debate what could be one of the greatest frauds. Debate what could be one of the greatest frauds in church history. We believe that this video will greatly benefit your study of the Bible version conspiracy. Enjoy and happy Thanksgiving. Feel free to listen to this while you prepare your big meal. So I'll always remember a few things from Chris's post-debate comments. James White proclaiming himself the winner when even many of his own fans felt he lost miserably. So just the felt there. Do-right Christians pointing out how immature and rude James was to Chris with his name calling, etc., and how polite and professional Chris was in the face of it. Chris talking about how little he actually believed his own position of Sinaiticus being a forgery before the debate, and how White's inability to defend its authenticity solidified Chris's own conviction. Chris pointing out that White's inability to acknowledge when Chris answered his questions about Sinaiticus supposed multiple authors. Okay, so we've got a few comments there on that page. So I'm going to get straight into this. So let's open this one up. And I'm going to play the beginning material as well, which is from Joseph Armstrong, because he's put this video up. So I don't want to, show this video and not show. He's got links to his Patreon and things like that. So I want to show everything. So let's just go through that. Okay, so it says here, is Codex Sinaiticus a forgery? Chris Pinto versus James White debate. Then it has Codex Sinaiticus is the world's oldest Bible, or is it? How and when was the manuscript created? How was it discovered? Has it been chemically tested? Is questioning its status only a conspiracy theory? You decide when you listen. And so I'm pretty sure this is called Noise of Thunder Radio on Chris Pinto's channel. Now, if the sound is really bad, if someone could comment and just say, yeah, it's too loud, too soft, because I usually just guess. I've got my volume here about, on 20%, probably 15%. And yes, I'm not really sure how loud or soft that would be, but.
It's time for another edition of Fighting for the Faith, Wednesday, December 11th, 2013.
They're Fighting for the Faith, so it might have been on another channel.
If you're joining us live today, we have a very different program. We are doing a live debate. That's right, a live debate between Dr. James White of Alpha and Omega Ministries and Chris Pinto of Noise of Thunder Radio. Thank you for tuning in. You're listening to Fighting for the Faith. My name is Chris Roseborough. I am your servant in Jesus Christ, and this is the program that dishes up a daily dose of biblical discernment, the goal of which help you to think biblically, help you to think critically, and help you compare what people are saying in the name of God to the Word of God. No shortage of crazy things being said out there. We take the time to slow down and stop and compare with an open Bible. Now, like I said at the beginning of the program, we're doing something a little bit different today. We're doing a live episode, and I've invited on the air Dr. James White of Alpha and Omega Ministries, as well as Chris Pinto, and they're going to be debating a topic regarding Codex Sinaiticus. Is it a modern forgery, and all of the implications that go with that? The format for the debate is pretty straightforward, with opening arguments, rebuttals. There will be a cross-examination portion in there. I am going to be serving as the moderator of the debate, and let me introduce the gentleman that I've invited in studio, actually via the phone, and that's Dr. James White and Chris Pinto. Gentlemen, are you there?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yes. We're here.
All right, good. Let me introduce Chris Pinto. Chris Pinto is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, founder of Agilum Films. He's a Christian, which is a Christian film ministry dedicated to defending the gospel of Jesus Christ through film and video production. He has written and directed some 10 documentaries and is also the host of the Noise of Thunder radio program, dedicated to exploring history and prophecy from a biblical worldview. Christian Pinto, thanks for coming on Fighting for the Faith.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's good to be here.
Okay, and Dr. James White, I don't think he needs an introduction. He's in the debating world known as an ultimate cage fighter, things like that. But Dr. James White is the director of Alpha and Omega Ministries, host of the radio program The Dividing Line, as well as Radio Free Geneva. And Dr. White, thank you for coming on Fighting for the Faith.
I should have expected an introduction like that from you, Chris, but thank you very much.
And did I
this is where I know Chris. Was it Chris White? I'm pretty sure.
Say he was a Calvinist, and we can go on. Anyway,
no mystery to that.
Yeah, what we will be doing shortly here, in fact, we're going to go ahead and get into the debate. Now, again, I am not a participant in this debate. I am simply going to moderate, and we will go ahead and get started with our 15-minute opening arguments. And so I think without any further ado, we can just get right to it. Christian Pinto, are you ready to get going?
I'm ready.
All right, then.
Yeah.
Then, without any further ado, we will go ahead and you will be defending. Well, actually, the question on the table is Codex Sinaiticus a modern forgery? And your position is that that's still an open question. That it hasn't been determined as to whether or not that it really is authentic or not, and so that will be the position that you will be taking. Dr. White will, of course, be arguing that it is an authentic 4th century codex. And with that, we will get right into it. And your 15 minutes begins now.
Okay, praise the Lord. Well, I must confess that I am not familiar with doing formal debates of this sort. However, I've seen a few. And I've always found most endearing the fact that those who debate will often begin by stating what they agree upon before entering into the subject matter. In this case, I am pleased to consider that this is an in-house debate among fellow believers in the Lord Jesus Christ, and that where the gospel of eternal life is concerned, about this, Dr. James White and I certainly agree. While we may be part of a family that does not always get along, does not always agree, nevertheless, we acknowledge that we are a family together in Christ. We also acknowledge that the Lord has told us to take heed that no man deceive you, and that we are to prove all things. And in truth, that's what this discussion is about. So that brings us to Codex Sinaiticus. Is it an ancient Bible created sometime in the 4th century, as is commonly believed, or is it a modern work created in 1840 by a Greek paleographer named...
So, to be specific, that would be 1839 that Simonides claimed that, apparently.
Constantine Simonides, which is what he said in the 19th century. This very question was explored by 19th century scholar F.H.A. Scrivener in his full collation to the Codex Sinaiticus. He dedicated a whole chapter to the question. Needless to say, Scrivener did not believe Simonides. He thought he was a forger and a liar. But then in 1907, nearly half a century later, another scholar named James Farrar, after re-examining the story of Simonides in depth, came to the conclusion that the matter had never been truly settled. Farrar called it, quote, an unsolved mystery of literature. Now, this whole subject came up for me when I was working on my documentary series on the history of the Bible. And we got into part 2, which is called Tares Among the Wheat. And that's where I came across the story of Simonides. And I remember when I first came across it, I thought what most people thought. I thought that Simonides was a forger, that he was a liar, that he was a trickster. But then as I looked a little bit deeper, I began to have questions. In 2008, I went to the British Library, and I was able to interview the curators there, Dr. Scott McKendrick and Dr. Juan Garces, who are in charge of the Codex Sinaiticus project, which is the project where they have most of the manuscript there in their possession, and they've been scanning the pages up to the internet now. They've launched the website several years ago. But I remember talking to them about the history of the Codex, and they were somewhat vague, but they did say that they wanted to come up with a full, agreed-upon history. And it sounded very interesting at the time that they worded it that way. And when I saw the history that they posted, I thought it was somewhat politically correct. But here's what they say on their website. They say this. They say, quote, events concerning the history of the Codex Sinaiticus from 1844 to this very day are not fully known. Hence, they are susceptible to widely divergent interpretations and recountings that are evaluated differently as to their form and essence. And so I found that to be a very interesting statement, and I think it could be.
So I'm just going to rewind that and go over that statement.
Recountings susceptible to widely divergent and known. Hence, they are susceptible to widely divergent interpretations and recountings that are evaluated differently as to their form and essence. And so I found that to be a very interesting statement, and I think it could be said that the story of Simonides, because it's so well documented, is at least one interpretation of the possible origin of that codex. But the question is, how did it all begin? In the 19th century, as many of us know, a German scholar named Constantine von Tischendorf discovered the Codex Sinaiticus at St. Catherine's Monastery in Egypt. And he discovered the manuscript in three phases. First, in 1844, he found the first 43 leaves. He said they had been jettisoned in a rubbish basket, but he didn't come up with that story right away. He brought the leaves back. He was somewhat secretive about where he got them. Then he went back for a second trip in 1853, and there discovered a fragment of the manuscript, the fragment from Genesis, he said, being used as a bookmark. Then he returns a third time in 1859, and there made the discovery of the main portion, which included a complete copy of the New Testament with part of the Old, the Epistle of Barnabas, and a partial copy of the Shepherd of Hermas. And so he comes back with his manuscript, he publishes it, and it's pronounced to be the world's oldest Bible. But then in 1860, you had this Greek paleographer, who was a controversial figure, there's no question, named Dr. Constantine Simonides. And he came forward in 1860, he saw the first facsimiles, and he declared that this was no ancient manuscript at all, but a modern work that he had created in the years 1839 and 40, and it was intended to be a gift to the Tsar of Russia, Tsar Nicholas I. And this was a project that he had engineered with his uncle Benedict on Mount Athos 20 years earlier. And then he describes the whole process in the newspapers. Now, when I first heard the story of Simonides, the histories that you read typically, and if you go most anywhere for the last 100 years, the histories that you read will tell you that Simonides was a forger, but not just a forger. He was the most brilliant forger, and he was a trickster and so on, and that he often peddled these manuscripts and this kind of thing. And that at one point he claimed that he was the author of the Codex Sinaiticus, and that people didn't believe him. He was denounced and exposed and this kind of thing, and then that was the end of it. When I began looking into the story of Simonides, however, I remember I had planned this reenactment where I had my actor, and he was going to be the guy who was going to play Simonides. And I was going to have him sitting there working on forging a particular manuscript and this kind of thing. And I said, well, let me go look into this. Exactly where was Simonides found guilty of forgery? So I go and I start looking into the history. And I had read somewhere that he was a convicted forger. So I go and I look up when he was convicted for forgery, and then come to find out he actually wasn't convicted as a forger. When he was brought into court, he was on one occasion, and he was declared not guilty. He was acquitted. Then the newspaper headlines the next day said, Simonides, no forger. Then you read in different histories that supposedly he had presented a forged copy of the Shepherd of Hermas at the University of Leipzig in 1855, and that this had been exposed by Tischendorf. And Tischendorf exposed it as a forgery, and that supposedly Simonides was going to get revenge on Tischendorf by making these claims. Well, then you go and you research the Shepherd of Hermas that Simonides had that was supposedly a forgery, And you come to find out that it wasn't a forgery at all. That even though Tischendorf called it a forgery in 1856, after he discovered Codex Sinaiticus had a copy of the Shepherd of Hermas in it. And when Tischendorf compared that copy of the Shepherd of Hermas with the Shepherd of Hermas that had been presented by Simonides, he realized that they matched. They matched enough so that in 1863, Tischendorf had to retract his former objections. We read about that, of course, in Philip Schaff's History of the Christian Church, Volume 2. But he retracted his former objections and essentially had to acknowledge that Simonides had been right, that this was a genuine Shepherd of Hermas, and that Tischendorf had been mistaken because he thought it was a medieval forgery. So in looking into the story of Simonides, and especially this episode with the Shepherd of Hermas, I began to wonder whether or not there were other unanswered or unknown issues, because many of the historians that write about these things don't tell you these kind of details. So I began looking into the details of Simonides' story, and then I stumbled across the history by James Farrar. And James Farrar, in his book Literary Forgeries in 1907, he presents probably the most in-depth analysis of Simonides. Now, he's certainly not always on Simonides' side. There are times when he is, and there's times when he isn't. There's times when he believes Simonides was a trickster and a forger, but then there are times when he's sympathetic toward him, and he believes that he was, in certain cases, falsely accused. But when it comes to the subject of Codex Sinaiticus, it's interesting that Farrar did not believe that the issue had been fully settled by 1907. And that's what struck me. So I began to look into the things that Farrar claimed and why he believed. Now, the Shepherd of Hermas was a big issue because in order for somebody to have been able to create the Codex Sinaiticus, he would have had to have had a copy of the Shepherd of Hermas. And the remarkable thing about that is that at that point in history, no Western scholar had ever seen a copy of the Shepherd of Hermas in Greek. It was unknown. They thought it had been lost to antiquity. And so here, this guy Simonides presents a copy of the Shepherd at the University of Leipzig in 1855 and 56. And then, what do you know, another copy that seems to match shows up in 1859. And while there were a lot of controversies, probably the one that I found the most startling after the Shepherd of Hermas was the fact that Simonides claimed, when he gave his lengthy description of how he created the manuscript, he talked about using vellum, for example, that was already of ancient character, that was found by him on Mount Athos, how he had written the characters in ancient Greek letters intentionally, because that was the whole point for creating this codex, to be a gift for the Tsar of Russia. And how then he had worked on it, and his uncle died at some point. He ran out of vellum, but then he decided to deliver it to Constantius, who was the bishop over St. Catherine's Monastery, and Constantius then delivers it to St. Catherine's Monastery by 1841, several years before it was said to be discovered by Constantine von Tischendorf. But perhaps the most remarkable thing in all of this is that while Simonides' story was being published in the newspapers, and he's given all of these details, and he's giving the names of witnesses, people who were still alive. There was Constantius, there was Germanus, the scribe, or the monk, who had carried the manuscript to St. Catherine's. There was Callistratus, another monk, who had apparently added certain corrections to the manuscript while it was at St. Catherine's Monastery after it arrived. And yet, despite all of these things, it seemed that the scholars, the critics, were not interested in pursuing the matter and actually testing and proving the things that Simonides said. And Farrar even says that they found it more convenient to declare as spurious anything associated with his name. And at one point, Simonides challenged Tischendorf to a public debate. He declared that he had put special markings in the manuscript and that he could prove that he was the true author if Tischendorf would bring the manuscript to London, not a facsimile, but the original, and that he would point out in public, in front of all the interested scholars, he would point out those places in the manuscript that proved he was the true author. And it appears that Tischendorf agreed to the debate at some point, but then at the last minute, he backed out. And so then Simonides challenged him on that, and he said that the public were assured that at a certain point, Tischendorf was going to show up with at least part of his great codex, but the date had come and gone, he said, and Tischendorf had not appeared. And so he said, let the favorers of the Sinaitic Codex urge him to come at once and brave the ordeal, or else forever hold their peace. And of course, Tischendorf didn't show up. So Simonides was denounced by the critics at the time and by most of the newspapers, although he did have some supporters, which is very interesting. There was the Literary Churchman, another publication called The Dial. There was the curator at the Mayer Museum, who supported him, John Eliot Hodgkin. In fact, Hodgkin continued to support him even after this whole ordeal had ended. But Simonides declared, before he left England in 1864, he declared that he had told the truth before God. This is what he said. It was published in the papers. He said, I have no sin. Sincerely, Constantine Simonides. And then he published a final work in 1864 titled The Periplus of Hanan, where he restated his position and reaffirmed that he was the true author of Codex Sinaiticus. And as far as we know, he went to his grave making that claim. And so I found it very interesting in studying his story that Farrar ended his analysis by saying, quote, the question, therefore, pending the acquisition of further evidence, must remain among the interesting but unsolved mysteries of literature.
All right. Time is up. That was Chris Pinto's opening statement. Dr. White, let me reset the timer. You now have 50.
So I think that was a very good introduction. You can tell Chris Pinto, he's come to this not really knowing anything, and he's just gone through and read some historian Farrar, and that's opened up a whole can of worms, a Pandora's box of information. So he's followed these and he's questioning himself of, because he was doing the video, I think it was Wheat Among the Tares, and talking about Simonides, and he's like, well, do I make this guy out to be a villain, forging things? I've got to portray this guy accurately. And then so he looks into this information and finds out, well, he wasn't convicted of forgery and all this other stuff. And so I find Chris Pinto very easy to listen to. That's why I didn't really stop at any part of that, because he is very well spoken, and it was very clear that he doesn't seem to have an agenda here. He's just saying that he wanted to portray Simonides accurately. He wanted to get to the bottom of this, and what had happened was it opened up a rabbit hole that he's gone down that he's saying has not been solved, and there is a lot of questionable conclusions that have been made back when Simonides was alive, and even afterwards, obviously by Farrar, saying that this is yet unsolved. So that's quite interesting. I think it's a very good introduction. So we're about to get into James White now, having critiqued many of James White's debates and looking at his material. We'll probably get 10 seconds into it and I'll be stopping and talking. Now, the reason that I didn't do that with Chris Pinto was because there wasn't really anywhere I needed to stop and go, well, actually, no, that's not true, this and that. Well, and I guess the thing is, too, I don't know that much about this issue. This is one of the things when I was on the program with Josh Gibbs, So Josh Gibbs invited me and Stephen Avery on, but then James Snap Jr. jumped in, and he sort of ended up having a bit of a debate with Stephen Avery, and so I'm just sitting on the sideline like, this is really boring. But these two know about a lot of the details, where my main take was I was sort of looking at, unless it's chemically tested, we're all sort of going by faith in a sense, where some people are saying it's fake. They're going by faith in that. Some people are saying that it is a genuine manuscript. They're going by faith. And so in a sense of going by faith, not blind faith, but faith in data that's been given to us by people, by people like Dan Wallace and James White and other people, Tischendorf. And some people are believing their story. Some people are believing Simonides' story and what other people have said about it. And so at the moment, we have our faith not so much in the science of, the manuscript hasn't been chemically tested, so we can't really have our faith in the science. We've got our faith in the interpretation of the facts that are usually stories, anecdotes, and some of these are very questionable on both sides. That's what I found. And so, but Chris Pinto is saying that most of what he found said about Simonides was not true. I know David Daniels had said this as well, that when he was going through the material, he was like, well, how come I'm already in the mindset where I think this guy is just a fake, he's a phony and all the rest of it? Where's that coming from? Is it true? Is it false? And so we'll be looking at all that. But let's let James White start. And so let's continue.
15 minutes for your opening argument.
Waiting for you to say go.
Go ahead and go.
All right, thank you. Our debate this evening will not be easy to follow. Our time is far too short, and please remember that Brother Pinto has produced a film that is longer in runtime than most of the Lord of the Rings movies, so the day
he's already just grinding. I mean, it shouldn't matter how long a movie is. It's the content of it. And when you're talking about something as in-depth as bibliology and the history of the Bible, it doesn't matter if it goes for hours and hours. Like James White does dividing line programs that are 3 hours long, and that's longer than the Lord of the Rings movies. And so
danger exists that we could become completely lost in the many allegations and claims made therein. Furthermore, the majority of our audience has never seen Codex Sinaiticus, Codex Vaticanus, or almost any other biblical manuscript, let alone is its history common knowledge, even amongst seminary.
Okay, so he's saying most people have not seen these. Now, this is a big thing among text critics, where you go and you visit a manuscript and you get your photo taken looking through the glass, or even if you can go into the library and turn a page, and read it. This seems to be like almost like a pilgrimage, so it's a bit like, well, have you been to Rome, like sort of thing, or have you been to Mecca, well, you don't count, you like imagine you're in some argument if you're a Catholic and you just made the stance of, have you been to Rome? Well, you haven't. Oh, okay, so you don't know anything, sort of thing. And just because you haven't seen Sinaiticus in the flesh, I mean, I remember the testimony of David Cloud, and he said when he went to the British Museum and he saw Sinaiticus, he said there was a whole busload of people that just pulled up, and he asked someone and said, so who are these people? They said, oh, they're Jehovah's Witnesses. And he realized that the weight of that whole thing was like, yeah, these guys see that this manuscript changed Christianity forever, and they follow that manuscript and they believe it's great, and that's one of the main reasons they reject the King James, because of Sinaiticus. And so they visit this thing like it's a shrine, like it's some sort of idol, which is quite amazing. But anyway,
graduate, so the challenge this evening is great. However,
so he was saying that most graduates don't even know much about these manuscripts. So that's why we want to go through Codex Sinaiticus and at least get up to speed, where someone who someone like James White or Chris Pinto, these guys know about the manuscript, that we're up to their level and that we can understand what's being said. And sometimes reading between the lines of what's being alluded to and things like that. And so when someone's mentioning Simonides, we know what they're talking about. When they're mentioning Uspensky, when they're mentioning other the new finds, we know what's going on. And so this is one of the things that I've discovered with inadvertently becoming a bit of a guru on the Textus Receptus. In building my website, because I would go through and type in, okay, Theodore Beza was this type of guy, that type of guy, he did this edition, he did that edition, and so I'm trying to find the best information. And so in searching for all that and building the wiki style website that I've done, after a while this just becomes stuff that rolls off the top of your tongue, the tip of your tongue. And so I guess it's a bit like if you want to be a really good basketballer. When you're a little kid, you're bouncing that ball all the way to school, all the way home. You're sitting on the couch with that basketball, spinning it on your finger. You're walking down the street. You're playing basketball with your friends after school. You just hold that basketball most of the time, and then you become familiar with it. And so I guess with the Textus Receptus issues, I've familiarized myself with a lot of those things like Revelation 16:5 and other places, Easter, and so they've just become so familiar to me that it just rolls off the top of my tongue. Now, there's a lot that I don't know, but I think what we want to do is we want to get so familiarized with these things that we actually surpass what James White knows about this. Because what I find is James White, like when I listened to the latest Dividing Line, he was talking about Jeff Riddle, and it was quite amazing. He's trying to remember these stories. Now, I pointed this out in his debate with Peter Van Cleek, that he got the names wrong of people and the situation wrong. So he was saying that Erasmus didn't realize that the Align brothers, had just simply copied the book of Revelation from his own text. So he tricked himself to think that they had changed the text. And I was just like, oh, there is just error upon error upon error just in those statements. So he's mistakenly saying the Align brothers, when 100 years later there were two guys called the Elzevers. Now, they mistakenly get called the Elzever brothers. Now, even if you were to get the blue-bound Textus Receptus printed edition, you can see where they actually omitted the word brothers there. I'll just see if I can find it. Oh, there it is. No, that's not it. Because that used to be the common way of saying it. There was the brothers, the Elzever brothers, okay? But they actually weren't brothers. It was an uncle and nephew. So oftentimes people are just trying to be more accurate. They're like, oh, okay, uncle and nephew. But if people say the Elzever brothers, I'm like, I know what they're talking about, okay? But that was 100 years later. So James White is calling these people who did the Aldine edition the Align brothers. So he's confusing the Elzever brothers story, which they weren't even brothers. He's bringing it back 100 years, and he's saying they're called the Align brothers, where it's actually the Aldine print press, which is named after Aldus Manutius, who's the most famous printer. It's a bit like calling Leonardo da Vinci Leonardo DiCaprio. You know what I mean? It's like, well, that's a bit that's pretty bad, but it's like, okay, well, we all make mistakes. But then imagine if Leonardo DiCaprio sometimes got called Leonardo DiCapsicum or something, and he's just saying Leonardo DiCapsicum did, and it's like, man, you're making error upon error. Then he's trying to say that Erasmus didn't realize that they just copied his text, and so he inadvertently had this mistake in all of his later editions. And it's like, just this weird story about Erasmus and this anecdote that's not even true. And you're just looking at it going, man, it's so bad. But the thing is, James White used to be on the ball with a lot of this stuff, but he's dropped that. He's gone on to, you know, trying to be like a bit of a Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson type of character and talk about wokeness and all the rest of it, where he used to talk about text criticism quite a lot, and he had quite a lot of things to say, things I wouldn't necessarily agree with, but at least he was on the ball with what was happening. But he seems to have really dropped his standards and saying this type of thing over and over. So we want to at least get to the place where we surpass James White. And so that, I guess that would be on a 1 to 10 scale. That would be like a number 2, you know, sort of thing. But we want to get to the point where we're at least like a number 5, where if someone throws out, what did Ouspensky mean, or what did he say, or what did he do? We know what Ouspensky, we know who he is, we know why he's mentioned, we know his basic life story, we know about Simonides, we know about these things. And so that's where we want to get to that point. And so, and that's going to come from refreshing ourselves constantly with this material. And also, I guess I'm going to start making some website material with this information on it. So I'm going to be going through revising things. And so I might even do some of that live because sometimes what I'm doing with the Textus Receptus website is I'm looking at something like Erasmus, and you look at all the articles about him, and you'll just find a little crumb of information. It's like, oh, he lived a year here, he was in England, or he was in Venice, or he was in Rome, and so you get the magnifying glass and you just start looking into that, and there's so much involved, and the people who he was hanging around, and it just shows a whole different picture than what's the usual commentary on an issue like, say, Erasmus or Beza, or like even if you read the Wikipedia article on Beza, it's usually just talking about political things, and so it might mention that he's the Huguenots, and it might mention Calvin and things like that, but it doesn't usually go into his linguistic ability. It doesn't usually go into the Bible translation issues that he was working on for many, many years, the Greek text, the Latin text, and usually it's just overlooked. And so on my website, I'm trying to expound on those things and get information. And sometimes it's really hard to get that type of information. So we want to put as much information as we can on Codex Sinaiticus and also Vaticanus, but also these characters involved with this. And we want to make sure that we can back up what we're saying with the facts. And so let's move on and let's listen to James.
However, may I assert that the importance of our time this evening is to be found in this fact. Mr. Pinto's thesis, namely that Sinaiticus is a modern text written innocently in 1840, also involves a wide range of associated accusations. For it would require us to believe the Jesuits have been behind a campaign to not only alter the manuscript, but then to utilize it in company with Codex Vaticanus.
Okay, so it's interesting that James White says, okay, well, because Chris Pinto didn't really mention the Jesuits there, but I guess he might do that in his Tares Among the Wheat. So that would probably be the next video that I'd have to look at, and what his claims are, because this debate just didn't come out of thin air. That was because there were claims made in a video. So we want to sort of look at what was happening around those times. And I'm pretty sure I remember, Chris Pinto saying it is a Jesuit conspiracy. But at the end of the day, it's all it takes, like, for something to be a conspiracy, is for you not to like someone, and for them to have an agenda to do things that you don't like. So, say Carlo Martini, in line to be a pope at one stage of his life. He was one of the main architects behind the NA 24th, I think it was the 24th or 25th edition. And so Carlo Martini, he was part of that committee. So he was a Jesuit. And so, I mean, when we're talking about Jesuit conspiracy, I mean, say if the Pope wanted to promote Catholicism in Argentina, say, for example, but not he wanted to demote Protestantism. That might be a public announcement. That might be something that he's like, well, we want Catholicism to grow, not Protestantism. He might announce that publicly, but we would see that as a conspiracy because they are conspiring to come against our type of Christianity, or our true Christianity, which I guess depends on what label you have. But so that would be considered a conspiracy. So to have someone like Carlo Martini work on the text and things like that, that is a Jesuit conspiracy. Have someone like Eugene Nida training, the Jesuits in Bible translation and then becoming Bible translators and things like that. That is a conspiracy against having evangelicals do Bible translation. And it's just an open conspiracy. A conspiracy doesn't have to be something that's hidden behind closed doors and no one knows about it and all the rest of it. A conspiracy is just when two or more get together and conspire to do something. And so we have a lot of baggage around that word because, the JFK thing, and I'm pretty sure the CIA sort of coined the conspiracy theory model so that anyone questioning, what the government did during those years was considered conspiracy theorist. And we see that, 9/11, a whole bunch of other things, Now it's just thrown around like if you have just an alternative point of view, conspiracy theorists, it's pretty lowbrow sort of stuff. It's when you get it when you're debating with someone and they call you conspiracy theorists, it's like, really, because all a conspiracy is, it's like if we just say we were at war with name a country, say China, and we would say that they are conspiring to do this and to do that against us. It doesn't mean it's like they're doing witches' covens and lighting candles and upside down crosses. And no, they're doing we're conspiring against them. You know what I mean? That's all a conspiracy is. And to have a conspiracy theory is like, well, I'm not exactly 100% sure, but this is what it looks like, and this is my theory. But usually it's backed up with fact. And so, I would say just from a look at, say, that like the JFK thing, what is a conspiracy? Well, I believe that the government did what they did to JFK. A form of the government, probably the CIA, wouldn't put it past them doing that type of thing. They've already been doing this in many other countries, overthrowing governments. Many people have been killed. Millions of people have lost their lives due to the CIA and their intervention. Their blowback has caused a lot of Americans to have a hardship living overseas. I've seen that here in Australia. I remember I was on a job site once and the guy was American and he kept apologizing to everyone about what George Bush was doing. And I was thinking, man, this poor guy, like he just wants to move on with his life. And even recently I was talking to one guy and I just jokingly, I said, what he said, oh, can I get through that door? And I said, what's the past, Joe Biden or Donald Trump? And he said, man, I'm sick of talking about this. And I said, oh, sorry, I'm not understanding you. He said, well, I'm from, North Carolina, blah, 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 and I'm tired of talking about politics. And I said, look, I'm only joking. Like I'm only having a joke. Like I'm not. And he said, well, everyone wants to talk to me about this and I'm tired of it, And he was really serious. And I was like, okay, well, but the thing is, Americans are facing blowback because of what's happening in America and their intervention into other people's business, into Libya, into Ukraine, into Iraq, into Pakistan, into China, into you name it. They're in every country, intermeddling with their politics, munching through their economies, and demonizing them. They accepted socialism. That's why they went broke. Well, plus we overthrew their government, plus we put sanctions on them, plus we destroyed their fossil fuel industry, plus we did, oftentimes, I'm digressing, but you can see there are conspiracies in the world today. There are economic conspiracies, there are political conspiracies, there are agendas by people to get certain things passed, mostly for money or power. And so usually a conspiracy theory is something that's used against someone to try and discredit them. So you'll have a theory of how something goes, and people will just say, conspiracy theorist, like as if that stops the conversation. Usually when people say that, I just think they're lowbrow people who don't think for themselves. Most of these people have never had an original thought. They can't think outside of the television. They go around with their mind just filled with what the television has told them. They respond like they would on television. And it's quite strange. It's bizarre. It's actually really bizarre. And so, but sadly, a lot of people like that, and they are very opinionated. And usually, the empty can rattles the most. The one with the least to say is usually saying a lot. And the ones with the most to say are like shutting their mouth because they just want to get through the day and not, turn the boat upside down every 10 minutes. But so yeah, I really find the whole label conspiracy theory and all this sort of stuff is ridiculous, because I mean the Catholics and Protestants had wars against each other. Europe was torn to shreds through the Reformation period, and on both sides there were issues. I'm just labeling them Catholics and Protestants, not born again Christians and everyone else. But so there were conspiracies on both sides. We know, if anyone knows the history of the Jesuits, we know that these people were very violent, very brutal. Ignatius Loyola is a very questionable person in history. And I think the rise of Islam actually radicalized a lot of these Catholics, because they were worried that Europe was going to be overthrown by Islam. So they sort of felt like they had to radicalize. And I've seen that sort of in like in India, where the Hindus tend to have been quite radicalized. But I think that was their response to what they were seeing with certain religions coming over and becoming part of their culture. And then they had to become just as radical to get them out of their culture. And so that's what I see happen with the Catholics. They had to become this radical force to come against what was happening. And so, but it's amazing that all of these groups, that they would consider, they would believe in conspiracies. And I think if you don't actually believe in conspiracy theories, that's like saying you don't believe in mathematics. It's that dumb. It's just a stupid statement to say that there is no such thing as a conspiracy or a conspiracy theory. Now, you can have conspiracies that are stupid. That's a different thing. If you think that little grey men have turned up on your lawn and they've poisoned your water, and now you're gonna get sick and die of AIDS because you drank alien water or so. Like there's some really dumb, stupid things out there that are considered under the label of conspiracy theory. But there are a lot of things that are just now general knowledge. I remember like 20 years ago, things that I used to say were quite controversial. And I would say things and people would look at me sideways and go, oh, where have you gotten that? But usually I would back up everything with stats and facts and figures and all the rest of it. Now all those things that I was talking about that were controversial are just sort of like common knowledge. And you people will just be like, oh, did you hear on the Joe Rogan show they were talking about MK Ultra? And I'm thinking, well, I knew about that in the 90s. They actually apologized about that in the 90s, the government, So but a lot of people are getting into that now. And I think COVID, like the years of COVID, opened up a lot of people to think differently and to question the government, because a lot of people were just saying yes sir, no sir to whatever was coming through the pike, and now they're realizing that, oh, hang on, it's not all true, and you don't have to just believe a doctor, just because he's got a someone's got a lab coat on, or they're called a scientist, or they're called a medical professional, you don't have to follow their advice, Anyway, I'm rabbit trailing. That's sort of like a interlude. Let's just continue on.
In fact, almost all the papyri that have been discovered in the past 100 years, in a grand and vast conspiracy, all aimed at attacking the veracity and sufficiency of Scripture.
So notice he said almost all the papyri, they are a grand conspiracy. I guess he's talking about the Jesuits, to come against Scripture. See, what James White doesn't admit, which in several books, there's a very good book here. Now I'll just, oops, is that upside down? It is too. Byzantine Text Type and New Testament Textual Criticism by Harry Sturz. Now, this goes into how the papyri have a ton of Byzantine readings in them. And so the thing is, many things have not been classified as Byzantine readings because of the labeling system used. Because they say, oh, well, how can you have a Byzantine reading before the Byzantine Empire? So it's a bit like if I said, well, in America in the year 300, that's, hang on, it wasn't called America then. How can it be in America? It's like, well, you get the drift. You know what I mean? Or in the United States of America, in that area. So, yeah, oftentimes people overlook the fact that the papyri is filled with Byzantine readings. And this is one of the reasons why Westcott and Hort was so debunked, because they had claimed that the Byzantine text had come from around the time of Chrysostom. And so, but when they discovered the papyri, all these Byzantine readings are there. So that debunked the theory of Westcott and Hort. But yeah, James White is sort of, oh, well, all these papyri prove the Textus Receptus wrong or whatever, or the King James wrong. And it's like, no, we're not saying that. The papyri actually in many places defend the TR, defend the readings of the King James version. And so, you know, I'm not exactly sure what Chris Pinto has said in his video, but we will watch that pretty soon. Hopefully I can watch it and without any copyright issues. I'm pretty sure that Chris Pinto would be fine for me to go through it.
As I have engaged in the defense of Scripture, its inerrancy, and the doctrine of sola scriptura for 3 decades, I feel...
So, you know, James White and his, I'm defending the Scriptures. Yeah, like Bart Ehrman has been until he wrote, you know, misquoting Jesus. And, you know, James White, when he was going to debate Bart Ehrman, he said that there's really not much difference between their positions. He said that pretty much he has said everything that Bart Ehrman has said in his book, The King James Only Controversy, except Bart Ehrman's taking it a little bit further in a few areas and, you know, causing people to doubt God's word. And I was just thinking that's because both of these guys are on the same team. They're both critical text people. They've both been very highly influenced by someone like Bruce Metzger, who's deeply compromised. And they're coming up with the same type of material. But James White sees that what he's doing is defending the Word of God. No, he's defending a particular new type of the Word of God. So it's only been around, this new text has been around since Westcott and Hort. They've amended it a little bit here and there and given it a haircut. And it's the same horse, different rider sometimes. But they have, yeah, he's defending that text and demonizing anyone else who holds to the traditional text that the Reformers had, that, you know, people for the last 400 years have read and loved and enjoyed and seen as the Word of God. He attacks that and basically belittles people who hold to that position. So he sees that as defending the Word of God. I guess it's like a Jehovah's Witness in defending their text. You know, they feel like they're defending the Word of God too. So James White and saying, well, the last 30 years I've defended, you know, sola scriptura and all this other stuff. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, he is defending a completely different text. And when I say completely different, oftentimes someone like Mark Ward or others, they point out where there's similarities. Well, no one's looking at the similarities. We're looking at the differences. That's what we're focusing on. You don't go, well, okay, here's a banknote that's a fake, and here's a banknote that's true. Let's look at all the similarities in them. No one does that. You look at the differences. That's how you can discover if something's a fake, So I just can't stand it when people like Mark Ward do that. It's like, why are you doing that? No one's interested in that. Yes, we know there are similarities. Yes, you can go sometimes through a whole chapter and there's no text variant. But then you can go to the last 12 verses of Mark and they're thrown under the bus. They're put under your feet. They may as well use that part of the Bible as toilet paper. It's rubbish. James White said it's Gnostic readings in people's Bibles. Peter Gurry says they're apocryphal readings. The Pericope Adulterae, 12 verses again, deleted. People want to delete them. They're double bracketed in the NA28, which means they're certainly, most definitely not part of Scripture. So why are they in people's Bibles? 1 John 5:7, throw that under the bus. And so that's what we're talking about.
Feel the weight of Chris Pinto's concerns. But I truly believe that his imbalance and his graying to Romanism, and especially the Jesuits, a near supernatural capacity and ability to be behind just about anything in history, results not only in an indefensible apologetic, but it actually cripples the great treasures God has provided to us in our day, treasures found in the great unsealed manuscripts of the Bible and the invaluable papyri that enable us to defend scriptural authority and accuracy against the most challenging critics.
Okay, so he believes that Chris Pinto has a bent toward blaming the Jesuits for everything. Now, have we seen this? Yes. When we're reading stuff like Gail Ripplinger's material, we can see, she will have sort of like, there's an evil agenda. It's related to this one person. It goes back to this, Madame Blavatsky and other people. And you're sort of left there going, yeah, okay, that could be true. Or, sometimes there are certain things that seem a certain way. And sometimes people are just simply evil all by themselves as well, And so, but it just depends, because you can be talking to one person. They can be very intellectual. They can know a lot about what's happening in the world, what's happening behind the scenes, which isn't usually reported in the mainstream media. And they can eloquently tell you how the royal family are behind everything. And every little conspiracy that's happening in the world is because of them. And, and I could even help bolster that. I remember when I was in Bougainville, where Australians killed 20,000 Bougainvilleans there through the Papua New Guinea army back in the 1990s. So it's not a long time ago. And I remember going into Parliament, into the main building. I was able to sit in the Prime Minister's chair or the President's chair, whatever they call him over there, and ask questions in Parliament. And I remember going up to the boardroom. I went right up to the top to the boardroom, and there was a huge picture of the Queen there. It was just surreal. Like, here I am in this Pacific island. I'm in the main Parliament, and I'm looking at this huge picture of the Queen above the boardroom, and I'm thinking, and the Queen was, major shareholder in Rio Tinto, who bankrolled the whole war. And so, we can see, like in Iran, 1953, with Mossadegh being overthrown, that was the CIA and the Queen, basically destroying the Anglo-Iranian oil company, destroying the concept that Mossadegh wanted to nationalize the fuel to benefit the people. No, the British and the CIA, they wanted the funds to go to America and to Britain. So they overthrew the government. They demonized him as a socialist, and then they put in the Shah for 20, 30 years. And he completely destroyed Iran in a sense. Well, it was prospering in a sense as an American puppet, but it was growing 90% of the world's heroin. And then the Ayatollah stepped in, and he was backed by. So all that I'm saying is just history. The Ayatollah, he was involved with the CIA overthrow of Mossadegh. He was funded by the Americans, Iran-Contra affair, where you have Ollie North, testifying that basically he was told to sell weapons to the Iranians and to the Iraqis. So they had a war where 1 million people died. They used chemical weapons. The Americans knew that Saddam Hussein had chemical weapons because they had the receipts for that, because they'd sold it to Saddam Hussein. And then, you can see throughout history and throughout time, there are a lot of things that don't add up. But you could put the royal family at the top of that, or you could put the CIA at the top of a lot of these military coups and wars, specifically in the Middle East and in South America. Almost every country in South America has been completely destroyed by the CIA. Then you could put the Queen there, you could put the CIA there, or you could put the Jesuits there. I mean, they've been around for a lot longer than all these other guys, and so that the Roman Catholic Church has been running for a long time. The Jesuits have really only been around since Ignatius Loyola, and that was the Counter-Reformation movement. And what they've done throughout history, I mean, you can even look at the power that they had with the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. It was in the Library of Congress. They've got the Jesuit oath there because they believed that it was possible that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated from direct orders from the Pope. That because the Roman Catholic Church has evolved into different things over the years. It's become a horrible warmongering, psychopathic cult, and then it becomes this nice, friendly, lovey-dovey, we accept everyone cult, and so it's changed its appearance, and it's changed its motivations over the years. It's morphed into many different things, and so sometimes when you're talking about it today, it's like a completely different animal than it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and so it's changed. It's gone through many different phases, and so but who else could you put at the top? You could put the Jews at the top. The Swiss banks. When you know about the Bank for International Settlements, a lot of people look into the reserve, the banking system in the United States with the Federal Reserve. But if you go a step further, it's usually the Bank for International Settlements is the one who is dictating the interest rates for countries involved, and also dictating what the price of gold is twice a day, which is hugely powerful. And you'll find that the vast majority of people who are involved with the Bank for International Settlements are Jewish bankers. And so you find Credit Suisse, most of the people there are Jewish bankers. You'll find that people saying, oh, there's a conspiracy among the Jews, blah, 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 with finance. I mean, you look there and you go, well, a lot of that does add up, So you could put them at the top of the pile and then go, okay, well, there's a Jewish conspiracy, blah, blah, blah. And that's, Hitler was pointing towards that, and Bolshevism had already destroyed Russia and saying that was a Jewish conspiracy as well. And so that's why he was trying to, get rid of the Jews and all this sort of stuff. But then you can have, just who else would you put there? United States. I guess you got the CIA already involved with that. Who else can you put up that? Then you've got the Black Pope, which is just some other thing. I'm just trying to think. Then you got the Bilderberger group, and then you've got who else is there? I could probably name about 10, but it's been quite a while since I've ever even thought about half of these groups. But I think that yes, there are many, many different groups of people who are wicked, who are have issues. The United Nations, the World Health Organization, the International Monetary Fund, etc., etc. You could go through any of these and put them at the top. So you're writing a conspiracy book and you're putting a pyramid there, and who's at the top? Well, oftentimes they just sort of cram them all together, but sometimes these are warring factions. I mean, who's running Russia? Russia's just like a wild animal. They tend to just do their own thing. And so are they run by the Jesuits? Or is the whole Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox connection, is that its own sort of beast sort of system in Russia as well? So Anyway, I'm fully rabbit trailing, but let's just continue. So all I'm saying is, Chris Pinto, he seems to have gone the route where it's a Jesuit conspiracy. But I can understand why, because it's coming against the scriptures. So this was a huge issue with the Counter-Reformation. The Jesuits were saying that the Latin Bible is the Bible. It was pretty much defended by the time the Clementine Vulgate came around. It's like, well, that's our Bible, where the Protestants were like, well, we've got B's and we've got the King James Bible, and so that's our Bible. But they also had the magisterium. They've got the Pope's authority, and they've got tradition, and so that the three-legged stool, where they're like, well, you guys just have a paper pope sort of thing. So that they've been coming against the Bible for many, many years, and people can point to epochs of time where the Jesuits have introduced certain concepts like paleography into the mix, which has caused a lot of people to doubt the Word of God. We see this also like with the Bible societies, Roman Catholics getting involved there and causing problems. Roman Catholic influence in ecumenicism, to do with Bible translations. I mean, if you were to read, I've got a book there by David Cloud called Rome and the Bible. Well, I've got that one. Evangelicals in Rome by David Cloud. I would recommend people read that one. But also Rome and the Bible, which I can't seem to find there. But very, very interesting book about how Rome has attacked the Bible. So, and I wouldn't say David Cloud is a conspiracy theorist, but I think in the area of bibliology, we have to be aware of who the enemies of the Word of God are. And so there are many, many different religions that come against and attack the Word of God. And so even in, say, Hinduism, that they would point to, I remember reading a Hare Krishna book before I was a Christian, and they were saying, the 10 Commandments where it says thou shalt not kill, it's actually talking about killing animals. I was like, even as a non-Christian, didn't know much about anything. I was like, nah, that doesn't sound right. But in doing so, they're actually attacking the Word of God and saying it's saying something it's not. So all we do is look at different degrees. And so we can see people in Islam, many people coming against the Word of God and saying, there's problems with the New Testament, there's variants. And so they would side with Bart Ehrman and what he says a lot about the Bible. But then we look at the Roman Catholics. Roman Catholics, they are prolific in trying to place doubt over the Word of God and trying to go with anything but the Textus Receptus, and so to go, this is a conspiracy by Jesuits. I'm if you're like conspiracy aliens, Area 51, that type of stupid conspiracy. What can we say about that? But if you're like, no, the Roman Catholic Church really wanted to not go with the Textus Receptus or with the King James Bible. And so over the years, from the time of the Counter-Reformation, they've been coming against the texts of Erasmus. We can see that Erasmus was pulled over the coals at the Valladolid conference in 1527, where they were questioning whether he was a heretic or not. All of his books were put on the forbidden list. And, people like Stephanus and Beza, Calvin, these people were demonized by the Counter-Reformation, Ignatius Loyola and others. And so there has been a concerted effort to come against the Word of God and to come against the Reformation text. So regardless of whether you support that text or not, you have to agree that that's like I have a conspiracy against the New World Translation. And I think I'm conspiring with James White against that translation. I'm conspiring with you guys against that we're all pretty much in agreement that that's a bad translation. Okay. Now, it's at varying degrees, because James White would still agree with the underlying text of that. But we would all say, yes, the New World Translation is rubbish. It's a bad text. And we conspire together against that text. Even if we don't really know each other or hold hands together, we are conspiring against that to get people to doubt that text, to get people to move away from it. And hasn't there been a concerted effort to come against the Textus Receptus, to come against the King James? Now, where has a lot of the most vocal parties come from who come against the TR? It has been the Roman Catholic Church. It has been the Jesuits. And so for Chris Pinto to conclude that bibliology has been affected by the Jesuits, that's a no-brainer. It's unless you're going to be like James White and say, well, aliens coming in your backyard and, poisoning your water or something, unless he wants to degrade the conversation down that low and sort of get to the point where it's like, if you mention conspiracy theory, you're an idiot. If he wants to keep the conversation on a level where we can discuss things normally without stupid tags, without demonizing people, without ad hominem argumentation, or without generalizing and genetic fallacy, type of thing. Like, I understand people can just come along and say wild claims, it's a Jesuit conspiracy against this and against that, and it's just weird, it's strange, and but we can't deny historically, and James White can't deny historically, that the Jesuits have been coming against the King James Bible and against the Textus Receptus. It's just a fact, and so you can't deny that, and so that has to be acknowledged. Anyway, so I'm going to move on but I just wanted to say that now Techmeister says the differences between Sinaiticus and the TR to me are shocking. One might believe there is a conspiracy quite easily. Sinaiticus has so many instances where the divinity of Christ is negated or removed. Yeah, absolutely. There are so many things that Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, to me, it's like when someone shows me like Sinaiticus or Vaticanus, they may as well be giving me the New World Translation of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And like imagine if you're there praying to God and saying, God, I really want an answer for this thing in my life. And someone goes, here you go, have a Bible. And it's a New World Translation. You're sort of like, do I really want to hear from this? And that's what, when I'm looking at Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, I just see a terrible text in both, and amazingly they'll say Codex D, Codex Beza is terrible and all the rest of it, and James White will say that, but we're like, well, can't you up your standards a little bit and say also that Vaticanus and Sinaiticus are terrible? But no, apparently they're not terrible, they're the best, and they're the only ones that really show that the last 12 verses of Mark should be deleted and that they're apocryphal or Gnostic, as James White would say. So it's quite amazing. 1 John 4:3 has it so wrong. Not stating the right doctrine here is pretty serious. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure that's the one where it says if you don't confess Jesus Christ is come in the flesh, you're not of God, or something like that, where that version actually deletes that. I'm pretty sure that's the verse, but I'm just going to move on here. But if you want to talk more about that, that's fine.
Brother Pinto has the great advantage this evening. It is always much easier to allege than to disprove. I shall only briefly comment on the tenor and character of his film and his audio commentary on this subject, for I must invest the vast majority of my time on the real scholarly reasons why this theory is bankrupt and has been rejected universally by those who know the state of affairs in the study of the New Testament manuscript tradition. Further, I simply have to assume that the audience has viewed the film. There is not sufficient time to review a film that is 3 hours long. Okay, so
that's a good point that James White's making. People don't really know the historical context of where Chris Pinto is coming from. So we would have to go through that film. So it's a 3-hour-long film. And that might be something interesting to go through maybe at a later point, to go through all those films, because I know, like, sometimes I watch those films and they do go forever. But the thing is, there's a lot of interesting things in it. Now, I remember when I first watched them, I was like, yep, agree. And I was like, do I actually agree with that? Or is that just something that's a popular thing around, Baptists? They sort of think that. And anyway, back to, yep, agree. Oh, I'm not really sure. And then, so there were a few bits that sort of made me a bit cringy or a little balk at it a little bit. And, but we're mostly focusing on Sinaiticus here. So what we'll do is we'll find those pieces in those films, and we'll look through those issues, and we'll go through them. So that way we're not going through this blind, and we're not Chris Pinto and James White are talking within a historical context of, I think this is 2013, and so we want to talk about what was happening back then as well. And so Helg Everson is in the house. He says Chris Pinto is very good in the opening, and this whole episode is very good so far. Good work and good argumentations. Thanks, Helg.
My presentation this evening will not be convincing to Mr. Pinto's targeted audience. His films, in my opinion, utilize conspiratorial thinking based upon finding a Jesuit behind every bush.
And I guess the thing is, James White's been dealing with people like Gail Ripplinger and others. But what happens, see, James White can deal, he's like, oh, Gail Ripplinger, she's, everything goes back to Madame Blavatsky, and everything goes back to some evil person, the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, sort of behind everything. But what James White tends to, like, if I use that same standard, if I said, okay, well, Calvinists, let's look at, the Westboro Baptist Church. Okay, they're Calvinists. They hold signs saying God hates fags, and just focused on that, focused on Calvinists who are questionable. There's a lot of questionable Calvinists out there. But then you get people like Jeff Riddle, who I'm like, okay, well, we might disagree on a few things, but I would respect his scholarship on bibliology a lot. And, the other people, the guys from Agros, oh man, I've forgotten the name. Taylor DeSoto and Johansson. I'm pretty sure it's Johansson. Anyway, I'm forgetting these names. But, I would agree with them on a lot of what they've said on bibliology and things like that. And I think what they're saying is great. And so sometimes I know that they're tuned into me because what I'm saying is pretty much what they would be saying. It might be from a different angle, but, it's a mutual sort of respect there. But we would disagree on other things. But, if I was to talk about Calvinism or whatever, I would probably look at what exactly people who are in the mainstream of Calvinism are saying, and so not just look at the extremes. And also, you can't just go with the mainstream. You have to go with, like, there might be 3 or 4 different types of mainstream, because, like, say at the moment, there's a lot of people going through after the cessationism movie, and they're looking at different groups labeled as continuists. Like, even the Pentecostals and Charismatics, a lot of those people are actually at loggerheads. You got oneness Pentecostals, who the vast majority of Charismatics and Pentecostals would see as a cult. So oftentimes it's like, label all these people as the same. Whoever's got the most numbers, well, that's who you have to expose. It's like, well, yeah, oneness Pentecostals, I don't know how big they are, but just say they became the most popular, biggest group. It's like, it wouldn't be something that really anyone would say is an orthodox group. And so, believing that baptism saves you and all this sort of weird stuff. And so you just got to be careful with the labeling system. James White just tends to have a really sweeping brush with generalizations. And so let's continue.
If you grant to Romanism that level of power and ability, almost to the point of omniscience and omnipresence, you will not find my responses to be compelling. No one, of course, can question my opposition to Romanism. Anyone who suggests I'm in league with Jesuits ought to listen to a few of my debates with them. But I strive for consistency, balance, and fairness in my criticism of even those who oppose the gospel.
But the thing is, just because James White has come against Jesuits or debated Jesuits or come against, certain concepts of the Roman Catholic Church, that doesn't mean that he isn't joined at the hip when it comes to bibliology, because the Roman Catholic Church has come full circle, and now they agree with the Protestants with what the text is, and they follow the NA 28. If you just look at, say, NA 27, so, James White's saying all this stuff. So let's look at, I'll just type this in, NA 27 Vatican. I won't be 1 second. I'll just find this quotation that is in the NA 27 edition. Here we go. It looks like it's a quotation. Actually, I'll find a better picture than that. Sorry about this. And I'll read it out so we can all hear it. And or even like someone's made this Jesuit Bible versions. I mean, this is Bruce Metzger. He's offering to the Pope and to the main bishop at Constantinople and saying that we now have a Bible that we all agree on. I'm pretty sure this is in 1972. And, people make all these memes and everything. But here is the main one that I want to look at, because this is in their own writing. In the 27th edition of the Nestle Alarm text, listen to this. The text shared by these two editions was adopted internationally by Bible societies. And following an agreement between the Vatican and the United Bible Societies, it has served as the basis for new translations and for revisions made under their supervision. This marks a significant step with regard to interconfessional relationships. It should naturally be understood that this text is a working text in the sense of a century-long Nestle tradition. It is not to be considered as definitive because they want to keep making more money and all the rest of it. Well, they believe that they're doing science, and so it never ends. But as a stimulus to further efforts towards defining and verifying the New Testament. But when you look at the underline there, it's clearly an agreement between the Vatican and the United Bible Society. So the UBS and the Vatican, they're in bed together. They're deeply compromised. And this is the thing where James White can have as many debates against Jesuits as he wants, but he has to agree that the underlying text that he holds in his hand, there's an agreement between the Vatican and the United Bible Societies that has served for a basis for new translations made under their supervision. So they are in bed with the Vatican, and this influences the text. Carlo Martini had a lot to do with the formation of this text. And just as much as we like to point out, Unitarians had a lot to do with the Westcott and Hort text, and which underlies this text, because what they did is it was Bruce Metzger who said that they went to the Westcott and Hort text when they used that as a basis when they were creating the text with Carlo Martini and with Black and Walgren and Kurt Aland and a few others. So clearly there is a collusion happening here, okay? And so the Catholics have jumped in bed with what we would label as liberal Christianity. They I'll just get this picture here. Okay, well, that picture is gone. So with liberal Christianity, we see that the Roman Catholic Church are agreeing with what we would say is liberal Christianity, with the Westcott and Hort text and the Nestle, up to the 28th edition that's here today. And they're saying that that's the text, and they're saying that they support texts made or versions made upon that text. or from that original Greek text that they say is akin to the earliest Greek text that they can find. So the Roman Catholics are in bed with the Protestants here. So it's a bit like having the ecumenical movement. Say in the 1990s, there was a huge movement called the Promise Keepers. Now, they had the 7 promises that people had to keep. Now, you could have had people who were against Roman Catholicism, preaching against them, saying they're a cult, blah, blah, blah. But then if they join the Promise Keepers, there's a contradiction there. And so this is the problem with James White's like, I'm against the Jesuits, I'm against the Roman Catholic Church. You can clearly see I'm not in bed with the Jesuits. But on this issue, everyone who is involved with the Nestle Aland group of texts is in bed with the scholarship of Carlo Martini. If they're supporting modern versions, which James White wrote a whole book, Can We Trust the Modern Versions? They are in agreement with Eugene Nida and his interpretation of the scriptures, and also foreign language versions, which are mostly promoted by James White and others, if they're based upon the Nestle Aland text. The other TR editions are frowned upon, and so they are in agreement with a lot of Catholic scholarship. So just as much as someone who is involved with the Promise Keepers, an ecumenical movement, were one of the promises. There were 7 promises. It was like a lot of them were good. I'm going to be an honest father or whatever. I'm going to be a good parent, and I'm going to be honest with my peers, and I'm going to pursue God with all my heart. I can't remember. I'm just sort of making this up. I remembered back in the day they were quite good promises, but then there were like 2 that were bad. It was like, and we won't judge any other Christian group. It was like, and so then you had Mormons join and all sorts of weird cults join it, and it was like, oh, we're all brothers apparently. And but that's what's happening with the bibliology section of James White's theology. James White is deeply compromised with the Roman Catholic Church, with Unitarians, with a whole bunch of people of questionable authority. And he's adopting the same text as these people and saying, well, this is the word of God. And I just think that this is a blight against James White's judgment, because he can clearly show where, Mariolatry is wrong. He can clearly show where the assumption of Mary is not biblical doctrine. He can show all these things, but at the end of the day, he has jumped in bed with Rome in the compilation of the NA series, with Carlo Martini being one of the main editors. And also we can see that Rome is colluding with the United Bible Societies. And so we see that there have been Roman Catholic theologians, Roman Catholic professors and text critics involved with the text. We can also see with Mormons have been involved with the text too. So it's just like a hodgepodge. And so if he's just going to say, well, I'm just neutral, it's just science, it doesn't matter if they're Catholic or whatever, I just follow the text and I have my apparatus down the bottom and I follow that, I'm independent of all that. It's like, you can't really be independent of all that. You are guided in your thinking by people who not just direct, Jesuit influence through Carlo Martini, not just, direct translational influence through people like Eugene Nida and others, but also inadvertently through Bruce Metzger, through Kurt Aland, who compromised deeply and were trying to unify the Roman Catholic Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, and Protestantism, like in 1972. And saying, oh, we all have the same Bible now. And so, James White's like, oh, I debate Jesuits. Yeah, but you are in bed with a lot of the concepts and ideas of Jesuits in your bibliology, James.
This is required of us by our Christian commitment to truth. And I find Mr. Pinto's work, even though it contains many truthful statements, to be woeful lacking in fairness, balance, and accuracy. This is seen most clearly in the current film under discussion, and its grossly imbalanced and unfair treatment of the subject matter. It seeks to make connections without providing evidence. It attacks the character of Christian men like Konstantin von Tischendorf mercilessly.
It attacks the character of Konstantin von Tischendorf mercilessly. Well, we're going to see as we go along, we're going to look at the character of Konstantin von Tischendorf. Now, I think he was a scholar, a very good scholar. But as far as these guys having this outstanding Christian testimony, you can just see with the way that his stories about the manuscripts, his stories about his time at Sinai, most people agree that he's lying. Now, it seems that James White, he wants to make out that this guy was, had a Christian testimony. That's a whole nother thing. But I just we'll go through the character of Tischendorf, and we'll look at all that as we go through. We're going to discover more and more things about him,
while ignoring any and all counter evidence. And even when it admits documentary sources opposed its thesis, it takes the time to allege that the Jesuits were in control of the media, even in the 19th century, always a convenient way out of any factual problem. There is no way, of course, of debating such thinking. Every fact is simply dismissed as a Jesuit conspiracy. This is why I say, if you buy this way of thought, my presentation will not assist you. But for others, I would provide just one brief set of examples before moving to my key arguments about the Codex Sinaiticus. No stone is left unturned by Brother Pinto in attacking the character of Tischendorf. Yet the very sources that he gives evidence of having read, in particular the works of J.K. Elliott, James Farrar, and F.H.A. Scrivener, contained numerous statements that, if Mr. Pinto's work was to actually claim some level of fairness, accuracy, and balance, would simply have to be noted and explained. For example, he refers to Farrar's work, which is the most sympathetic of the three just named, yet he does not mention the following citations, quote, "But the temptation to deceive was born of its seducing facility, and Simonides was no votary of strict veracity. Other Greeks besides Simonides had lax ideas of the value of truth, and in literary ability he surpassed all his contemporaries, but unhappily the essential element of truth formed no part of his mental constitution," speaking of Simonides.
Okay, so I really want to find that quotation. So I do have a few pages opened up dealing with the Chris Pinto. Okay, so I've got the Chris Pinto debate summarized. Okay, it's interesting. TurretinFan's mentioned there, talking about that. But "'Tis among the wheat, hip and thigh review. It's missing. It would take me a while to find that. So let's just continue on. But that quote was really interesting. What I might do, I might try and I'll just go back a few seconds and I'll try and type in a few keywords there. And if it doesn't come up in the first one, I'll just avoid it. But if it does come up, we'll go down that rabbit trail a little bit.
And the quote, "But the temptation to deceive was born of its seducing facility, and Simonides was no votary of strict veracity."
Okay, calm. Looks like something's on calm. Okay, so I can't find it, but let's just continue. Maybe what I'll do, we'll just rewind it. We'll listen carefully to it because it's quite a quotation.
And F.H.A. Scrivener contained numerous statements that, if Mr. Pinto's work was to actually claim some level of fairness, accuracy, and balance, would simply have to be noted and explained. For example, he refers to Farrar's work, which is the most sympathetic of the three just named, yet he does not mention the following citations, quote, but the temptation to deceive was born of its seducing facility, and Simonides was no votary of strict veracity. Other Greeks besides Simonides had lax ideas of the value of truth, and in literary ability he surpassed all his contemporaries, but unhappily the essential element of truth formed no part of his mental constitution, speaking of Simonides. And the other often used source, that of Eliot, likewise contains these citations passed over in silence by Brother Pinto. Quote, "It will be seen that well before 1862, Simonides was known as a dubious character in scholarly and literary circles. What is particularly interesting is that despite this, so many people were prepared to debate seriously Simonides' challenge to Tischendorf rather than merely ignore it or dismiss it out of hand."
But I guess this is one of the things that Chris Pinto has brought out, that he felt the same way towards this guy as well, and then looked into some of these issues and found that, like, say, for example, he was a convicted forger. Well, he wasn't a convicted forger. So this is the claim of Chris Pinto. So I guess the thing is, people can demonize someone or promote someone, but you really have to look at the facts of the issue. And so, like, say with Tischendorf, James White's like, well, we know he was a good Christian guy, but even Dan Wallace and many others are like, well, he was pretty questionable with the way that he attained these manuscripts. Some people say he's stolen them. Other people are like, well, he lied about, the burning of these manuscripts, because they wouldn't burn that type of manuscript, But anyway, let's continue.
Then, with a subtitle of Simonides the Forger, what is surprising about the Simonides affair is not so much that it happened at all or that it lasted for over a year, but that a man with Simonides' known background had any credibility at all, end quote. These quotations from the main sources of our knowledge of this topic are directly relevant to Mr. Pinto's thesis, yet he ignores them while emphasizing all sorts of issues with Tischendorf that are not nearly as directly relevant. This is why any honest and balanced historian is truly put off by this film.
Okay, so James White's making the claim that Chris Pinto in the film is not really showing the true side of Tischendorf. He's demonizing him when Simonides, he's trying to make out that Simonides is a bit more like an angel than he really is, and so there's an imbalance there. So that's James White's claim. That's what he's saying. Let's continue.
But as I said, the key issue is not to be found in the imbalanced presentation. The real issue this evening is this. Could a 19-year-old youth have produced in a relatively short period of time the manuscript we know today as Codex Sinaiticus?
So this is one of the silliest things that I hear spoken about. Now, people talk also about Henry Stephanus. So Henry Stephanus went on to be one of the greatest printers in Europe, printing all of Theodore Beza's material, and the son of Robert Stephanus. Now, when he was young, he was doing collation work for his father. Now, just because you, at the age of 19, were watching baseball games and eating hot dogs and listening to Def Leppard, doesn't mean that these people can't be intellectuals by the time they're 19. I've met people who are very young, like 14, 15, and they're intellectuals already. And most of these people are homeschooled, actually. But it's because they study things. And you don't have to be a savant to copy a text that you're in a language if you're fluent in it. Okay. See, to James White and to most of these critical text scholars, the Greek in Codex Sinaiticus is like a Sudoku puzzle. It's like, let's figure out what it means, and then they're trying to parse this word and all the rest of it. Where to someone who reads fluent Greek, you just read it like it's the newspaper. Okay. So someone like Simonides, he could read it like the newspaper. To say that he couldn't have copied out that work, I mean, could you copy out, say the plays of Shakespeare? Could you copy out 1,000 pages in a couple of years with if you were trained in how to use that type of material, that type of pen? Could you do that in English? I'm pretty sure most people could at the age of 19. but because it's in Greek, it's like all this extra sort of mystical type of thing that no one could really do, and you know that this type of strange thing is put upon Henry Stephanus as well, and it's like I would say that Henry Stephanus was most probably reared up like half of the King James translators were, speaking these languages at a very young age, especially if his father was one of the most renowned printers in Europe and printing Greek text, printing Homer, printing, and became one of the best printers ever. You'd expect his son just to be this doofus, and if you're in Mount Athos, you're speaking Greek every day. I mean, I doubt that they would have that English would have been, considered something that they would converse in. People probably knew English in a sense where it had become an international language. So when people were going overseas, they had to speak it, and they would have been striving to learn it. But they're in Mount Athos. They're speaking Greek. They're writing in Greek fluently, and so it's just a bit like someone playing Paganini's 24th Caprice. It's like, well, you would never get a 15-year-old play that, and it's like, well, mate, they've got videos of 5-year-olds playing it, in Chinese kids just picking away, just playing these amazing pieces of music, and it's like. James White just comes up with this thing. No, he's 19. When I was 19, I was just eating hot dogs down at, my local sporting stadium and watching baseball or whatever. Just making out that I guess it's projection as well. James White's like, well, no 19-year-old that I know is writing Greek manuscripts. It's like, well, surely he knows 19-year-olds who are excelling in sciences, who are excelling in literature, who are, they are the top of their class doing PhD work. And like I'm saying, this is in his own native language. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that he spent that amount of time and come up with what he came up with. This would explain a lot of the mistakes in Sinaiticus. If you got someone who is older and more experienced, they wouldn't make a lot of those mistakes. You can see throughout the whole manuscript there's things rubbed out and rewritten over the top, and it's quite embarrassing. So when James White says that, I'm just like, what? And pretty much anyone over the age of 15, especially back in those days when kids aren't wasting their time on PlayStation and listening to rock music and all the rest of it. It's like they are spending their time in scholarly pursuits. I mean, you look at, say, John Boyce. John Boyce, he had read the Bible. It's quoted that he read the Bible by the age of 6 in Hebrew. And by the age of 13, he was already in Cambridge University and knew Greek. And so, and all throughout his life, he was praised as a brilliant scholar. So if I said, John Boyce at the age of 19 had written, 1,000 pages, copied out 1,000 pages of a work, it's like, yeah, I think anyone, I could probably do that at that age, So I just don't understand why James White does that. But anyway, it seems like a stock standard thing for people to do, to bring age into it. It's just like, okay. To me, it's just projection, and it also shows that they don't know many people of that age who are doing that type of scholarly work.
If he did, why is there such a mountain of evidence within the manuscript that his story is false? Who altered the manuscript after its deposition in the library at St. Catherine?
I'm pretty sure Simonides goes into that, like his uncle, But anyway, we'll find out.
Let's look at the text itself and see how the Simonides hypothesis fails the test of factuality. The Simonides theory states that a single man produced this manuscript with corrections being made by his uncle, dead by the time the controversy arose. Remember that this codex is around 1,400 pages long, written on fine but ancient parchment, vellum, Allegedly, this text was to be a gift to the Tsar, though his uncle's death ended the project for some reason. He claimed he found a very large parchment book in the library made up mainly of blank pages and used this material for the text, a claim I find highly dubious.
Okay, so what, they've got this old parchment there, and they were using that, but they find it dubious. Why? In Mount Athos, I mean, that's where a lot of Byzantine manuscripts come from. So they've obviously got a lot of this type of material to be written on. Why do you find it dubious?
In any case, at the ripe old age of 19, this young man, with some assistance from his uncle, produced...
So all we've got so far is that because he was 19. I mean, you don't have to be Rain Man to copy out a text in your own language. Maybe I should just quickly Google young scribes. I mean, I guess when you look at the Hebrews, they were copying manuscripts. That would be an interesting thing to look at, the age of a Hebrew scribe. Hebrew scribes. Age. Okay, so I'm not finding much there, but I'll look into that. I'll think about, how old people have to be to copy out something in their own language to do it in that type of format, and if they could do it in that period of time.
This amazing text containing the Old and New Testaments in Greek.
It's amazing to James White. To us, it's a text that it's filled with errors, so it would make sense if he was younger. So this actually fights against his position. You know what I mean? Like, but even if it was pristine and perfectly done and all the rest of it, it's still not out of the realms of possibility.
Along with a few other works as well. But this immediately raises the first, and I believe the most fatal flaw in the theory. Where did Sinaiticus get the text he copied? The text.
Well, it's Simonides said that he got it from Zosima's 1821 text. So I've copied that text from the prologue of Sirach, and I've compared it to Codex Sinaiticus, and also compared it to, I think it was Codex Alexandrinus. I can't remember now, but I compared each like line upon line, precept upon precept, went through and collated that to the best of my ability, someone who doesn't do collation. And there were a lot of similarities. There were a lot of the same words missing. Or in a sense where when you got to the end of a line in Zosima's, you could see how it was easy to have parablepsis, homoioteuton, architeuton, this type of thing. And so that was a manuscript. I might actually just quickly get that up. So that was on my Facebook Textus Receptus Academy group. In one of the files. So I did re-upload this. If I can find where files. Oh yeah, files. Here we go. There's been quite a lot of stuff put on there. I haven't even noticed that half of that's being put up there. So yes, that would be the latest one. Let's open that up. Okay, so it went to downloads. Let's go to downloads. Here we go. And so if you want to be part of this, oops, that's not it. There we are, sorry. The 1821 compared with Aleph prologue. And so the 1821 on page 138 with a link. So we've got the Greek there. So what I did is I wrote out the Greek. Yeah, so sometimes breathing marks, it's hard to make out here where some of the breathing marks went. So I just sort of point that out, that it's not exactly perfect, but it doesn't really matter with the breathing marks because Codex Sinaiticus doesn't have them, only in a few distinct places. So then we see Codex Sinaiticus with that portion there. So there are 2 pages to do with that. And so I copied out the text as well of that. See, what I did initially was I actually copied the text that they had on the website, which is completely different. It's actually a published text which has errors in it. So I had to pretty much redo the whole thing. And so what I did is I put it in small format so we could read along and look at it. But what we see is there are certain issues that have been made. So that says dedomenon, where this has deomenon. Just a little change, but it's got an extra theta, delta there, sorry. Here we have sort of like a nomina sacra way of writing Israel. And so, yeah, so I go through this so you can see where there's an omission here, where the words are in there. And just pointing out just general agreement and general inconsistency with those readings, so that someone who is more skilled, I've sort of done the homework for them. They just have to go through and look at these, and like you can see archeteton happening here with the para here, where it just has ara there in Sinaiticus. You can see where, yeah, like this has changed Engar to where it has N there too. And that can lead you on to other things where if it isn't Zosima's text, see, he said that he used this, but maybe he only used that in the New Testament. And so this has all got to be taken into consideration. And so this is a link to Zosima. Yeah, that's fine. It basically just said, warning, you probably get a virus if you open this. But so this is Zosima's text here. So what I might do, I might actually throw that into the chat. Where are we? StreamYard. Just in case anyone actually wanted to investigate that or look at that. There it is. Maybe I'll type in the name, because some people, they can't copy and paste the thing. And so you have that written there. So yeah, that it would be great to go through this document and compare every place like that. And so we're just doing a fair bit of homework for other people who have expertise in the field to be able to go through and not have to, type out. Like basically, I had to go through and type out every Greek letter, which was quite painstaking. When you've got this level of blurriness in the text, and also Sinaiticus being faulty, so I had to make up my own Sinaiticus text there. But yeah, you can see where Zosima has these readings. Sinaiticus has these type of readings. You can see some different changes here, some different endings. But there is a lot of similarity as well. I mean, you're looking at sometimes, I think there was one place it was like 36 words in a row that were identical. From here all the way up to here, it's absolutely identical. Actually, that would need highlighting there. And so that's where I have to be careful, because I did do one draft, and I'll just jump on my files. I did that in September 2020, and then I re-uploaded it. That's right. So let's see. Yeah, I amended, yes. So that's the first one without the emendations. Okay. Sorry about this. I'll just quickly grab that one. Oh no, that was the amended one. Okay, well, straight away I saw a mistake in it. So, but you can see the type of work that I had been doing. So that was, I was putting that on the Textus Receptus Academy. It'd be great to get a bunch of people doing that type of work continuously. Even just going through, some gospel stuff and trying to find out exactly what manuscripts were copied from. So that's what James White's saying. Where was this copied from? Well, that's what we're trying to figure out.
The character of Sinaiticus is utterly unique. There is no manuscript like it in the world for its unique reading, let alone.
Doesn't that go against Sinaiticus? Because if it is the Bible, if you have all these unique things in them, in this Bible, doesn't it make sense that it wasn't copied, so therefore it wasn't preserved, and people didn't use it? It's not translated, it's not copied, so people rejected it as a piece of junk, where if they saw it as the word of God, they would have copied it, they would have spread it around, they would have translated it, but they didn't. So that's proof against Sinaiticus. But even so, doesn't that show you that it's probably not really something that's well thought out, in a sense where it's sloppy? He's saying it's a unique thing, or doesn't that come against Sinaiticus, in a sense where if it's got a whole bunch of readings that match up with other manuscripts, like say Vaticanus or whatever, oh well, that's a good copy or whatever, but it's like it's got all these issues in it. So he's like, oh well, there's this 19-year-old boy, how could he do this work it's so amazing? But he's like, yeah, and completely different from everything else. It's like,
alone the number of corrections it contains. So how did
doesn't that go against James White again? If he's saying the 19-year-old boy couldn't do it, why would there be so many corrections?
Simonides come up with such a wildly unique set of readings, replete with around 15,000 corrections and alterations in numerous different hands? According to Simonides.
So he's saying numerous different hands, and so we're not really that sure about that. And so actually I might put the subtitles on. They might actually help. Yeah.
He utilized manuscripts of the Moscow Bible along with the printed edition.
Okay, so that's what we're talking about.
Of Codex Alexandrinus.
And that's what Stephen Avery has said, that it's the Moscow Bible of 1821 and also a printed edition of Codex Alexandrinus. He said he was using both of those.
But as many scholars have pointed out, no known Moscow Bibles, in conjunction even with Codex Alexandrinus, could ever produce the readings found in Sinaiticus. Further,
well, as I just showed, did I shut that page down? I think I did. As I just showed, there are quite a lot of similarities. So yeah, so obviously that needs to be highlighted. Apart from that, from there all the way down to here, there is no difference whatsoever. And many times the eta iota conjunction, I guess you'd say that was probably a diphthong, is used as an iota in Aleph. Okay, so the N is missing there. In Zosimus text it appears. So anyway, let's just continue.
Further collation of manuscripts takes a great deal of time. It is, of course, utterly impossible for Simonides, even with the assistance of his uncle, to both collate Old and New Testament manuscripts while then producing the ancient unsealed script of the manuscript. Such a task would take years. But still, the sources Simonides himself cites is a fatal flaw to this theory. There are far, far too many singular readings in Sinaiticus unknown in those sources. Further, Sinaiticus joins with the other early Alexandrian manuscripts, not only such as Codex Vaticanus, but far more importantly for our subject, the early papyri, in containing readings unknown in any Moscow Bible or even Codex Alexandrinus, which has a primarily Byzantine reading in the Gospels.
Okay, so what he's saying is that Sinaiticus has readings that they were like, wow, these are one-of-a-kind readings. And then when the papyri came along, it's like, wow, we got this reading in a papyri. So how could have Simonides have made those up? So it seems like a very good argument on its face. So we don't want to dismiss that. We want, this is James White's debate. This is his strongest argument against the position. So we want to keep that in mind, that that's what he's saying and that's what he's claiming.
This was indeed the first thought I had upon hearing a summary of the Simonides theory. I've had the opportunity of studying the text of the New Testament and doing textual critical work for a number of years now. And it is painfully obvious to anyone familiar with the readings of the early manuscripts that Sinaiticus is related to the early papyri in its readings, including many unique and important readings. But how can this be if it was produced by a 19-year-old with only a few sources to draw from, writing in a hurry, 60 years before the papyri were discovered?
So notice you're writing in a hurry. This is the usual. It's like, let's go through the catalogue of stories that we've made up about Erasmus and made up about everyone involved with the King James or TR. Let's just go through that catalogue. Oh, made it in a hurry. Let's grab that one. That works for Erasmus. Let's apply it here. And so, I mean, what else are you going to do on Man Athos? You're surrounded by priests. You're surrounded by monk type people, and your uncle is working on this thing, and so that's what you're doing every day. I'm sure you could get a 10-year-old kid to copy out the entire Bible. I mean, you'd probably have child services come around and arrest you nowadays for child abuse, but you could probably let them sit on the PlayStation for 3 months straight. But back then, I mean, we're talking about 150 years ago, completely different time frame. We're talking about people in Man Athos. We're talking about a young guy there, and he's probably trying to impress as well. He's doing what he can do, and I mean, it's quite amazing when you listen to people in the 21st century talk about the limitations of people back 150 years ago, 200 years ago, even like with Erasmus. They're just like, well, how could he remember all these things? He was like Joe Biden walking around, just slipping up the stairs, and he didn't know what he was doing and all this sort of stuff. And it amazes me the more that I look into Erasmus, how much that he did and proved that he did. Like the amount of print work that he did, the amount of proofreading that he did in Latin and in Greek. It's astronomical. This guy was just a machine. And so, but usually these type of anecdotes are like, this silly duffer did this and that, or how could he do it? He was in a rush. So he made mistakes, and these type of things are they're just arguments that really don't hold much weight as far as I'm concerned. And And this is James White's strongest argument. Now, for him to say, okay, well, Sinaiticus has readings that were only found in papyri, okay, well, that's an interesting thing to think about. But we really need some we really need some facts and some data with that. So hopefully, as we go along, we'll look at the claims of James White. One type of pushback against that, I would say, is what was I thinking of? Yeah, I had a thought there, but it's gone. Anyway, let's continue. Actually, Texe Marrs says, some claim Sinaiticus was an answer to the general revival of serious Bible readers of that time, be it Adventists or others. Lots of people had gotten the degree of freedom and time to study Bible. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. And then you're looking at an era where, if someone like Simonides is getting his basic needs met every day, 3 meals a day, he's probably praying with these guys and doing all that sort of stuff. And he's writing this text. He's probably like employed by his uncle. I mean, it's a bit like saying, looking at the Great Wall of China and saying no one could lay, 150 of those bricks a day. It's like, well, how do you know? How does James White know that? And so unless he's got some really good facts and figures to point out that it's impossible, it's like physically impossible to write that much out. If you're fluent in Greek, you should be able to do that. If I can get a 10-year-old to copy out the Bible, so.
Let me give 2 examples, one drawn from Scrivener and one drawn from my own studies. Scrivener points to Matthew 14:30, where all later manuscripts have the term boisterous after the term wind.
So let's just go back there. It was Matthew
14:30.
Matthew 14:30. 14:30. There was a Wikipedia article on that. That's interesting. Bible Hub, Matthew 14:30. Okay, so the King James has, but when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. So let's go to the Greek. I'm pretty sure they got Tischendorf's text, which should be a representation of the Sinaiticus there. Okay, so let's... So is Curon, okay, where the other text, Tischendorf, has Ephobathe, which doesn't look that correct because it's here, which would mean fearing because it's got phobe in it. So it looks like it's just omitted in his text. Yeah, so you can see it's shorter. It's got the Kyrie there. The same there. It's pretty much the same except it's omitting this word. So Westcott and Hort, they put it in a bracket there in their 27 edition. So Westcott and Hort had omitted it here. So it just means boisterous. So we can see up here, they've put it in brackets, meaning charging, okay, or boisterous, or let's have a quick look at the meaning. Mightier, strong man's house, boisterous is here. That's interesting. They don't have the King James word like there, where clearly it's in the King James. That would be a mistake there to not have it. Strong. Okay, so we get the sense it's a mighty, it's a strong. When it's talking about wind, it's a boisterous wind. Okay. Matthew 14:30 is the 30th verse of the 14th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew in the New Testament. In the original Greek, according to the Westcott and Hort, it has this. The King James Bible has the wind boisterous. Okay. The New International Version translates the passage as when Peter got out of the boat, he walked on water and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, it doesn't say boisterous, he was afraid and began to sink. Okay. So analysis. Okay. So we've got the bit of commentary there. Chrysostom, he says the blowing wind, so perhaps that's boisterous there. Yeah, but seeing the wind boisterous. So this is written in Chrysostom. So it doesn't really say much about that issue. Okay, I thought it might go into it, but we can see that this is a difference between the Westcott and Hort text and the Textus Receptus. So that's what James White's talking about. So let's let James continue.
Where all later manuscripts have the term boisterous after the term wind, yet Sinaiticus omits the term boisterous, as does Vaticanus, though it is inserted in Vaticanus in a later hand. The reading was not known, as Alexandrinus does not contain this portion of Matthew, and no Moscow Bible lacks the phrase.
Okay, so they're saying this boisterous reading. So this would be an interesting thing to look at. So where would I go to find that information about boisterous? It would have to be from like a parallel Greek Bible, showing like Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, Byzantine text. So I guess like a Nestle Aland apparatus, would probably show if there's anything amiss there. So, which I do have on my phone, the NA28 plugged into my phone. So I think, where are we? Downloads. It'll probably take me a while to get there, and then I'll be deciphering through different things. So let me just continue, and I will go through. I'll try and go through it on the side here, but if I can't, we'll just go back to this issue of Matthew. What was it? 14. Matthew 14:30. Well, we do have quite a lot of Greek text here, so maybe I can just have a quick look and see if there's anything that stands out. So let me just grab, say, the first three letters. Find. Okay. So it's not in Westcott and Hort. It's not in the Nestle text, but later on it's put in. Okay. It's in Scrivener's. It's in Stephanus's text. It's in the Greek Orthodox Church text as well. Okay, interesting. Okay.
Scrivener comments, quote, "One example will illustrate our meaning as well as 1,000, which the student may readily find for himself in the following collation," end quote. That is, there are literally thousands of places where Sinaiticus contains readings confirmed by later discoveries unknown even in Scrivener's time in the papyri, that would have been completely unknown to Simonides or anyone living in his day. To attribute these readings to mere chance is, of course, inconceivable. The second.
Okay, so that would seem like a strong case for James White's position, if it's true. So we have to examine whether that's true. So,
second text I will present, and we'll ask Mr. Pinto to explain, might be a bit better known to our audience. In John 1:18, we have a vitally important Christological text where Jesus is identified as the monogenes theos, the unique God who exegetes, explains, makes known the Father. The reading of the later manuscript is only begotten Son, not using the term God of Jesus here. Codex Vaticanus, and may I point out, I know of no evidence of Simonides even knowing of this manuscript, let alone having access to it.
And I mean, so apparently Simonides didn't even know that this manuscript existed because James White hasn't seen evidence that he knew it existed. I guess that's a pretty tall. I guess I've never seen evidence that James White thinks that the Leaning Tower of Pisa existed, so that he probably does know about the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It's a silly argument. Has he gone through all of Simonides' material? And and you're looking at a guy who he sold genuine manuscripts. So in his era, they were talking about Vaticanus all the time. But he didn't know apparently about Vaticanus, so because James White says so, because James White doesn't know that he knew, so he didn't know. That's it. So James White, he'll have this good argument, and then he just throws something like that in, and it's like, ugh. So he's only really made like one good argument here, where he's saying, okay, Sinaiticus was discovered. There's all these readings there, which that we're like, oh, these are rare readings, but then, or not seen anywhere else. And then Papyrus discovered, we've got these readings here and here. That makes Sinaiticus genuine, because where else would he have gotten these readings from? Blah blah blah. So if that's true, that's a good case. What are some pushbacks to that? I guess someone like someone of a conspiratorial nature could go, okay, well, the papyri is forged as well to bolster those claims. But then they had Byzantine readings there, which came against Westcott and Hort, which seems a bit strange to do. But you would have to look at each case, and you would have to look at the manuscript evidence. And I guess this would be an interesting thing to look at. Maybe actually Stephen Avery in his Pure Bible Forum. Here we go, Pure Bible Forum Index. Let's type in Matthew. Matthew, was it 14? Okay, so I'm going to have to search for that in Google, as it's a stronger search engine. Put the site in brackets, put Matthew 14:30. Okay. And this is one of the reasons mentioned by James Knapp Jr. So 14:30. Okay, so that just seems like a list. I'll show you what I'm looking at. So Matthew 14:30. It's just a list on the Sinaiticus conflation summary, mostly Revelation and New Testament. Scrivener's defense of Codex Sinaiticus, authenticity, full collation. And so let's look up Matthew. In Matthew 14:30, Codex Sinaiticus omits Iskuron after an Amon. In 1839, no other document, manuscript version 45 or farther was known to countenance such a variation. It has no such inherent probability as to have suggested itself to Benedict or to anyone else. When Roulette's revised collation of the Codex Vaticanus was brought to light again in 1855, it first became known that venerable authority contains the word only in the latter hand. Okay, so it was in Codex Vaticanus, but it was in a later hand, but they're saying that wasn't made aware. People weren't made aware of that. So this is Scrivener writing this, and I know Scrivener, I can point out where he makes lots and lots of mistakes when he's talking about the Textus Receptus. But, okay. It first became known that that venerable authority contains the word only after a latter hand. In 1857, Tregegels published his collation of the important cursive Codex 33, made 7 years before. This copy also omits iskuron. Thus were we now engaged in forming a text that should seem ancient. Here is such a textual variant as we should adopt for our purpose. It could not have been so employed 24 years ago, since the omission in any one codex was completely unknown and would not have been conjectured. Okay. Such are the grounds of our firm convictions that Codex Sinaiticus is a monument of the biblical scholarship and pious skills of the 4th century of our era. It is happy discovery. On its happy discovery, we congratulate the Christian world and respectfully thank Professor Tischendorf for the care and diligence he has bestowed upon editing it. Mill, indeed, in the appendix of his New Testament 1707, observes omit iskuron in the Coptic, but this, like so many others of his best readings, was neglected by later editors, Wetstein, Griesbach, and Scholz. No one will think that Benedict borrowed the, and then it cuts out, I guess, borrowed the reading from that. Scrivener had never seen the 2 manuscripts that combined to make the one Sinaiticus. He'd never touched them. He did not know that the Codex Frederico Augustinus looked like a new parchment, while on the major heist in Russia was, as he described, yellow. His age. His information was carefully fed by Tischendorf and involved deception. There is not much in the way of substantive argument above. When I have a few minutes, I will cull out some and give at least an overview response. The textual arguments are small. Much of this is saying that Simonides was a forger, which is not much of an argument against his producing a forgery or replica. Some of it pokes holes in his storyline, but that only means that he may have embellished the actual details of creation in order to make his own position look better than the objective facts. Okay, so yeah, we do have this being mentioned. So this is so it's in quite a long section of Scrivener. Okay. Interesting little scrolls of writing there. Okay, so that would have to be something that I read at another time. But our main concern is what James White's just mentioned this. But what we see is it's not exactly factual. Mill indeed has it in his appendix in his 1707. So it's known. He observes it omits Ishkuron in the Coptic. So just because it's omitted as well, so it's omitted, but does that mean that because Sinaiticus doesn't have it, that was purposely omitted? Okay. Or is it just a place where there is a common place of parablepsis? Let's look at okay, so boisterous. So it's basically it's not an actual word that appears here and in the papyri. It's the omission of a word. And so it's like, okay, well, the chances of, I guess if I went and got a random word in the New Testament and just deleted it, the chances of that appearing in another document somewhere that omitted, it could happen. I'm just throwing ideas out there. But anyway, it looks like there's been quite a lot written on this. So I really do probably need to go through that. But let's see if we can get to... I'll just reopen my page here. Yeah, here we are with the Greek. Yeah, so basically that's the TR reading. It's omitted, and they're saying because there is an omission between these two in a papyri somewhere, and also in Sinaiticus, that proves that it's copying from that. Okay. So maybe I can search for this. So I'll go here. Maybe even in images. Okay, well, that's something that I'm going to have to study, and I guess I'll put a lot of that information in my Textus Receptus webpage. So regarding John chapter 1, verse 18, James White seems to mention the alternative view that the critical text reading is not regarded as upholding the deity of Christ. He always refers to it as a conservative reading regarding the deity. Yeah, he never talks about how Jehovah's Witnesses view that text, or how historically people have seen the only begotten God to be a Gnostic reading. I've even heard him say, I heard someone said one time that it was Gnostic, but I can't remember who said that, and it seems ridiculous, and it's like, well, you've got to at least acknowledge that people did say that was a Gnostic reading, and that people wrote about it, the only begotten God, So anyway, we'll let James just continue for a little bit, and then I might be shutting this down soon because it's already been nearly 4 hours. So it's quite a long time.
Reading unique God at John 1:18. P75 and P66, the two earliest papyri copies of John, likewise have this reading. But they had not been discovered in Simonides' day. So where did he get the reading? Alexandrinus has son. The Moscow Bibles have son. And even more compelling is the fact that Sinaiticus contains a correction here, where the first corrector inserted the definite article before monogenes. This is important because it shows the reading of God is indeed that of the exemplar, not a mere scribal error in Sinaiticus. Mr. Pinto needs to explain to us where Simonides got these readings, which just happened to coincide with the papyri, which had yet to even be discovered.
So this is one of the things which James White, usually what he does is he tries to get people on a very technical little point, which Chris Pinto, you might have already thought about this, but this might be news to him. But then James White will be like, you have to explain how this happened. And it's like, you're in a debate. So if Chris Pinto goes, well, I can't explain how that happened just right now, it's like, well, I won the debate. That's the modus operandi of James White. I've watched enough of his debates to see him do that. Usually it was Revelation 16:5. I would have loved to actually have done all the study in Revelation 16:5 and not open my big mouth about it, and then been in the middle of a debate and he's like, Revelation 16:5, how can you prove that that's not a conjectural imitation? And I'm like, well, it does happen to be the name of Jehovah, and just succinctly explain it and just win that full debate point and just like slap him, sort of spiritually over the face and sort of say, well, there you go, James, nailed you. But, I don't do anything deceptive like that. Usually everything I do is just out in the open and, wear your heart on your sleeve sort of thing and get in trouble for it. But it's like, this is interesting material, and yes, it has to be answered, But right there and then, you know what I mean? The pressure's on. You have to answer this. You have 10 seconds to comply. It was like RoboCop, you know, you have 5 seconds to comply, 2 seconds. Then they're machine gunning you. It's like, no, well, yeah, a normal type of debate would be James White saying, yeah, well, you have to explain this. I understand that you mightn't know this information, but, you know, I will gladly correspond with you after the debate and we can discuss some of these points further. But James White's like, no, I won the debate, and then probably calls Chris Pinto a psycho or something on his show, and, you know, that's it. I won, you know, and never discuss it again.
This textual material would be more than enough to lay the Simonides theory aside, but there is more. Mr. Pinto likewise needs to explain why Sinaiticus clearly shows that multiple hands produced it in concert with the others. In other words, multiple scribes produced this work, along with multiple correctors, some writing long after the first. Mr. Pinto has quoted Dirk Junken's work.
So, well, that comes into paleography and the art of paleography, where we know that archaic mark was seen by the aliens as a very old text from the 13th century that represented Codex Vaticanus, but then it was proven to be a forgery, and it had Prussian blue ink in it. They chemically tested it, and it was shown to have been a modern-day forgery. So, which fooled some of the greatest text critics out there. So, James White, if he thinks he's better than the aliens, I mean, really, that's what we're pushing for, is to get get it chemically tested, get it looked at.
Scribal habits of Codex Sinaiticus. If so, then he should know that we have been able to isolate the work of the scribes, even to the point of analyzing how they use nomina sacra, for example. That is, we can identify their habits. This is particularly the case in contrasting scribe A with scribe D. Junken notes, quote, none of these three scribes has the same policy in using nomina sacra. They all differ in the frequency of their preferred contractions, as well as in some of the actual forms of the contraction. How can this be in Simonides' model? Who are these other scribes who work concurrently with Simonides? Junken also notes, quote, in Sinaiticus, there is not homogeneity in the quality of copying. Different scribes produce a demonstrably different quality of text, end quote. How could this be, since Simonides did not admit to anyone else being involved other than his uncle, and he limited his participation to correction?
I don't think that's true. I think since this debate, it has been proven that Simonides was saying there was someone else involved and his uncle. So that would make perfect sense.
Furthermore, speaking of corrections, how is it that Simonides has thousands upon thousands of corrections? Sinaiticus has thousands upon thousands of corrections. These were all allegedly the work of his uncle. Why are they in different hands? Why do they draw from different textual sources? Why does Simonides, for example, read Haas at 1 Timothy 3:16, and his uncle allegedly, in a crude and much later hand, scribble in theos in a nomina sacra form between the lines, while other corrections on the page are in a different ink in a different hand? I could have...
Well, I mean, that could be the same person just going through from a different angle. You know, handwriting experts, you know, paleographers, like I've said, they can fool people with a whole entire document that's a modern day document, that it's 13th century, and they're praising it and saying this is the best manuscript, and then it's just, oh, it's a forgery. You know, snakes and ladders. It's right at the top 1 minute, and then it's right down the rubbish pit the next. And so I just don't trust that these people have every aspect of handwriting down pat. And I guess the thing is too, this is an early debate. You know, I remember when this came out, it seemed like it just came out of left field. It was like, oh, this is interesting. And then I went and watched the Weed Among the Tares, I think it was, that came out then. And so, but yeah, so I guess I'll let James White just continue to the end of his opening, and then I'm going to shut it down because I think I'm getting a little bit tired. I'm starting to sort of forget where I'm heading with all this. It's been nearly 4 hours. I probably need a cup of coffee or something, but let's continue.
Of course, extend these examples for the entirety of the 90 minutes of this discussion. But time will not allow this. Instead, let me close by pointing out that Mr. Pinto's professed concerns are quite noble, but he is tilting at windmills simply because he is seemingly not taking the time to study what conservative Bible-believing scholars have said about the field of textual criticism. His primary evidence of the evils of Codex Sinaiticus which he connects with an overarching conspiracy on the part of the Jesuits to overthrow the authority of the Bible, is a citation from a BBC documentary. I use the term lightly of anything produced by the BBC, especially when it comes to Christianity and Christian history.
Okay, so BBC is usually liberal, so we've got to be careful of what the BBC says. Is that relevant to what Chris Pinto mentioned?
Wherein a narrator indicates the corrections in Sinaiticus indicate the text of the New Testament was still fluid and changing in the 4th century.
Well, if you compare that with James White's theory that it's from the 4th century, as well as Codex Vaticanus, and they both have their ancestry in P75 and P66, yes, it's fluid. It's all over the place.
Rather than finding solid, believing Christian scholars who can respond to such a statement, the very character of these corrections betrays the silliness of the notion and the conclusions drawn by the rabidly anti-Christian BBC documentary. Mr. Pinto decides the real evil is not the misuse of Sinaiticus by liberals, but is Sinaiticus itself, and this is his fundamental error. Sure, folks like the BBC and atheists and all sorts of others will twist and turn any fact of history in their vain attempt to suppress the knowledge of God. What is new about that? But to think that Codex Sinaiticus is somehow this great tool of evil simply because ignorant men and women use it as a tool of evil is foolishness in the extreme. The reality is Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, Alexandrinus, Washingtonius, P52, P66, P75, P46 are great treasures that, when seen within a Christian worldview and handled fairly and accurately, are a tremendous bulwark of truth.
And disagree with each other abundantly, like hugely, like ridiculously.
Our New Testament is the single most widely attested document of all of antiquity. It is also the earliest documented work of antiquity. Having this wide variety of manuscripts is a great blessing, not a curse to be avoided. Mr. Pinto's desire to enshrine a particular localized text as the final authority is common, but it is also foolhardy. It cannot survive apologetic examination, and it does not actually assist in the defense of the Bible. It hampers it. As such, I would highly encourage Mr.
So you've got to be going around spreading sort of a watered down like Bart Ehrman message where it's, you know, we've got Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. They don't agree with each other, but they're the oldest and best. And they go back to P75 and P66, which are completely different, like 79% coherence. It's the limit is 78, and they're considered not related. But it's 79. See, they're very closely related. It's like, man, you are stretching this. You yeah.
Mr. Pinto to turn his considerable talents toward a robust defense of the faith that will actually promote the cause of Christ. Such is much needed in our day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. White. I'm going to reset the timer here. Chris, you are going to have 10 minutes for to offer a rebuttal to what Dr. White has said and expand upon your arguments. You may go.
Okay, so I think we'll leave it there at I'll just get rid of this comment here. So we are at the 34-minute 51 mark. And so we'll just continue on from there. And I'll look into Matthew chapter 14, verse 30 about that omission. And I'll find the papyri where that's supposedly being found. Because, I mean, if Mills saw it was missing in texts, that would have been known. They're sort of like, oh, it's unknown. I mean, Mills' work was pretty well known. And so it probably appears in other margins somewhere. But they're saying, oh, it doesn't appear anywhere, you know, but then it's like, oh, but it does. It's like, so what usually happens is TR people have to do all this homework and everything. Then they're like, well, it does appear here. But for our purposes, it might actually point to a text that was used by Simonides. And so we're looking at Zosima's text, we're looking at Alexandrinus, and so perhaps there is something there. But it apparently is a marginal note in Vaticanus. So I'll sort through all that. I'll put it in an article on my website under Matthew chapter 14, verse 30. And that way we can look through that together and see what's going on. But, and so obviously Stephen Avery and a bunch of other people have probably done a lot of work on this already. So I'll be putting their information into my website and acknowledging them for that. But let's say goodbye. I don't know where to go to from here, so I'll just bail. So thanks for joining us, guys. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.